In a rain-soaked London flat, Hercule Poirot opens a cryptic letter from the past, shattering his calm with a plea to unearth a long-buried secret. 12 years ago, at the shadowy Montague Manor, young heiress Clara Montague vanished, her fate hidden behind a web of lies spun by a wealthy family. Now, a mysterious key and a dying woman's confession pull Poirot back into a case he swore to forget, a labyrinth of betrayal, a locked-room riddle, and a personal connection that haunts him as he unravels clues pointing to murder and a wartime conspiracy. Poirot must confront the truth he once chose to conceal, racing against time to deliver justice in a case that could redefine his legacy. Chapter 1. The Letter from the Past. The rain fell in a steady, mournful patter against the tall windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, a rhythm that seemed to echo the restless stirrings of his mind. It was a grey afternoon in the autumn of 1935, and Poirot, seated at his polished mahogany desk, was in one of those rare moments of idleness that both intrigued and irritated him. His hands, immaculately gloved as always, rested lightly on the arms of his chair, his head tilted slightly as he gazed at the flickering flames in the fireplace. The room was a study in order, the books aligned with geometric precision, the crystal decanter of cognac gleaming softly, the ormolu clock ticking with metronomic reliability. Yet, despite this harmony, Poirot felt an inexplicable unease, as though the universe were conspiring to disrupt his carefully curated calm. It was then that the post arrived. The sharp rap at the door startled Poirot from his reverie, and he called out, "Entrance," with a touch more impatience than he intended. His valet, George, entered, bearing a small silver tray upon which lay a single envelope. The paper was yellowed, its edges frayed, and it bore the faint, musty scent of age. Poirot's keen eyes narrowed as he took it, noting the unfamiliar handwriting, but hurried, with a slight tremor in the loops of the letters. "Monsieur," George said, his voice as measured as ever. This was delivered by hand. The messenger did not wait for a reply. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "By hand, you say, and no return address?" He turned the envelope over, examining the wax seal, which was cracked but bore the faint impression of a crest, a lion rampant, perhaps, or a griffin. The seal was unfamiliar, yet it stirred a faint memory, like a whisper from a dream. "None," Sir George replied, retreating with a discreet bow. Poirot waited until the door clicked shut before slicing open the envelope with a silver letter open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its ink faded but legible, written in the same trembling hand. The words seemed to leap from the page, each one a spark igniting memories Poirot had long thought buried. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, I write to you, in the utmost secrecy, knowing that you alone possess the intellect to unravel the truth I dare not speak aloud. You will not remember me, for our acquaintance was brief, but I was present during that affair at Montague Manor in the summer of 1923. You promised then to keep silent, and I trusted your honor. Yet now, as my days draw to a close, I find I cannot rest until the truth is known not to the world, but to you, who saw the shadows and chose to turn away. The girl, Clara, did not vanish as they claimed. There is blood on those walls, monsieur, and a secret that festers still. I enclose a key. It will lead you to the answers, if you dare to seek them. Forgive me for this burden, but I believe you will understand why it must be you. Yours in desperation, Eleanor, VPOIROT's fingers tightened around the letter, his pulse quickening. Montague Manor, Clara, The name struck like a hammer against the delicate machinery of his memory, dislodging fragments of a case he had vowed never to revisit. It was not a case he had solved in the public eye, not one of the triumphs chronicled by his friend Hastings or splashed across the newspapers. No, this was a shadow case, one of those rare mysteries that had left even Hercule Poirot uncertain of the truth, but of what to do with it. He rose abruptly, crossing to the window to stare out at the rain-slicked street below. London moved on, oblivious to the turmoil in his mind, the clatter of hansoms, the shouts of newsboys, the hurried steps of men in bowlers. But Poirot saw none of it. He saw instead the sprawling lawns of Montague Manor, the ivy-clad walls, the faces of those who had lied to him, and the face of Clara Montague, whose portrait had haunted him. Her eyes wide with a fear she could not voice. The key mentioned in the letter was not in the envelope, a fact that both irritated and intrigued Poirot. Eleanor V, who was she? The name was unfamiliar, yet she claimed familiarity with that summer of 1923. A servant, perhaps. A guest, or someone more intimately connected to the Montague family. Poirot's mind raced, cataloguing possibilities, discarding improbabilities. He returned to his desk, spreading the letter flat and studying it anew. The paper was of fine quality, the ink a deep indigo that had not faded uniformly, suggesting it had been stored in uneven conditions, perhaps a damp attic or a locked drawer. The handwriting betrayed age and infirmity, but also determination. This was no idle missive. It was a plea. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a second knock. George again, this time with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "This was left at the porter's lodge, sir," he said. "The note attached says it is for you." Poirot's heart skipped a beat as he took the parcel. The note was brief, scrawled in a different hand. For M. Poirot, as promised. He tore open the paper to reveal a small, tarnished brass key, its teeth worn but distinct. It was an old-fashioned key, likely for a lock of some antiquity, and it bore no markings save for a faint scratch that might have been a letter or a symbol. Poirot held it to the light, turning it slowly, as though it might whisper its secrets. "George," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within, "prepare my travelling case. I may need to leave London at short notice." "Very good, sir," George replied, but Poirot barely heard him. His mind was already elsewhere, racing back to that summer of 1923, to the case he had buried deep within the vaults of his conscience. The Montague affair had begun, as so many of Poirot's cases did, with a summons. He was younger then, not yet the celebrated detective of international renown, but already known in certain circles for his uncanny ability to see what others missed. The letter had come from Sir Reginald Montague, a baronet of considerable wealth and influence, whose family estate lay in the rolling hills of Kent. His niece, Clara Montague, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only rumours and a family. Desperate to avoid scandal, Poirot had been intrigued, not least because Sir Reginald's letter hinted at more than a simple disappearance. There were complications, he wrote, that required discretion. Poirot arrived at Montague Manor on a sweltering July day, the air thick with the scent of roses and the hum of bees. The manor itself was a marvel of Jacobean architecture, its red brick facade softened by centuries of ivy, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. But beneath its grandeur lay an air of decayed physical but spiritual. The family greeted Poirot with a mixture of relief and suspicion. Sir Reginald, stern and imperious, his wife, Lady Beatrice, frail and withdrawn, their son, Henry, a charming but evasive young man, and Clara's cousin, Margaret, whose sharp tongue belied a nervous disposition. There were others, too, a governess, a butler, a gardener, all of whom seemed to carry secrets in their guarded glances. Clara, Poirot learned, was 22, an heiress to a portion of the Montague fortune, unknown for her beauty and spirited nature. She had last been seen 3 days prior, after a family dinner that, by all accounts, had ended in tension. Her room was undisturbed, her belongings intact, yet there was no sign of her. The police had been called but found nothing, and Sir Reginald, fearing gossip, had dismissed them in favour of Poirot's private inquiry. From the outset, Poirot sensed deception. The family's story was too polished, their grief too performative. He began his investigation with his usual method: observation, questioning, and the relentless pursuit of the little details that others overlooked. A scuff on the staircase, a half-burned letter in the grate, a locket missing from Clara's jewellery box. These were the threads he began to weave together, unaware that they would lead him into a labyrinth of lies. Back in his London flat, Poirot set the key on his desk beside the letter, his mind bridging the gap between past and present. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows like an impatient summons. He lit a cigarette, not his usual habit, but a concession to the moment's gravity, and exhaled a slow plume of smoke, watching it curl toward the ceiling. The letter from Eleanor V. was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at the feet of his pride. To ignore it would be to admit defeat, and Hercule Poirot did not admit defeat. He began to pace, a habit that aided his thinking. The case of Clara Montague had been unlike any other, not because of its complexity, though it was complex, but because of its personal toll. There had been a figure in that case, a man Poirot had not expected to encounter, a Belgian refugee named Julien Dubois. Julien had fled the horrors of the Great War, carrying with him scars that were not all physical. Poirot had known him briefly in Ostend before the war had torn their lives apart, and their reunion at Montague Manor had been a shock. Julien was a gardener at the estate, a quiet man with haunted eyes, and Poirot had sensed that he knew more about Clara's disappearance than he dared say. Was Julien connected to Eleanor V? Was she, perhaps, a pseudonym, a way to protect her identity? Or was she someone else entirely, a witness, a conspirator, a victim? The key, Poirot decided, was the next step. It must unlock something, a door, a box, a secret. But where? Montague Manor was the logical starting point, but the estate had been sold years ago, its new owners unlikely to welcome an inquisitive detective. Still, Poirot had resources, contacts in the police, old friends in high places, and his own formidable reputation. He sat again, pulling a fresh sheet of paper from his desk and beginning to write. First, a letter to his old friend, Chief Inspector Japp, requesting any records related to the Montague family or the manor's current ownership. Next, a note to Hastings, who was in London for the week and would surely relish the chance to join a new adventure. Finally, a telegram to the Kent Constabulary, inquiring about any incidents at Montague Manor since 1923. These were the first steps, the opening moves in a game whose rules were still unclear. As he wrote, Poirot's mind returned to Clara. Her portrait had hung in the manor's great hall, a striking image of a young woman with auburn hair and eyes that seemed to plead for rescue. He had studied that portrait for hours, searching for clues in her expression, her posture, the artist's choice of colours. It was not vanity that drove him now, but a sense of duty to Clara, to Eleanor, to the truth itself. If there was blood on those walls, as Eleanor claimed, then Poirot would find it. No matter how deeply it was hidden. The clock struck 6, its chimes pulling Poirot from his thoughts. He folded the letter and placed it in a locked drawer, along with the key. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the city outside was settling into the quiet of evening. Poirot stood, adjusting his waistcoat and smoothing his moustache, a ritual that restored his sense of control. He would dine alone tonight, he decided, and use the solitude to plan. Tomorrow he would begin in earnest. A visit to the British Library to research the Montague family, a call to Jap, perhaps a journey to Kent. The case was alive again, and, with it, a part of Poirot that had long been dormant. He crossed to the fireplace, where a small photograph rested on the mantel, a rare personal touch in his otherwise impersonal flat. It showed him and Hastings in happier times, standing outside a country inn, their faces alight with laughter. Poirot smiled faintly, then turned away. The past was calling, and he could not refuse its summons. The next morning dawned bright, the rain replaced by a crisp autumn sun. Poirot rose early, his mind sharp despite a restless night. He dressed with his usual care, charcoal suit, polished shoes, a teapin gleaming like a star, and breakfasted on croissants and coffee, a nod to his Belgian roots. By 9, he was at the British Library, poring over old newspapers and genealogical records. The Montague family, he learned, had been prominent for centuries, their wealth built on shipping and land. Sir Reginald had died in 1928, Lady Beatrice a year later. Henry, their son, had inherited the estate but sold it in 1930, reportedly to cover debts. Margaret, Clara's cousin, had married and moved abroad. Of Clara herself, there was little. A brief mention of her disappearance, followed by speculation that she had eloped or fled to avoid scandal. The papers were silent on her fate, a silence that Poirot found more telling than any headline. He made notes in his precise, angular handwriting, cataloguing names, dates, and connections. The manor's new owners were a retired banker and his wife, unlikely to have any link to the case, but Poirot would visit them nonetheless. The key, he suspected, was tied to the manor itself, hidden room, perhaps, or a forgotten safe. He also noted the name Julien Dubois, underlining it twice. If Julien was still alive, he might hold the answers Poirot sought. By noon, Poirot was at Scotland Yard, where Jap greeted him with a mixture of warmth and wariness. "What's this about an old case, Poirot?" Jap asked, leaning back in his chair. "Thought you'd retired from digging up ghosts." "Not retired, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. "Merely selective. I require information on Montague Manor, Kent, circa 1923. Anything you have, police reports, property records, even gossip." Jap chuckled. "Gossip, eh? That's more your line than mine. I'll see what I can dig up, but it's a long shot. Those old files are a mess." "Do what you can," Poirot said, rising. "And do it quickly, if you please. Time is not my ally in this matter." That afternoon, Poirot met Hastings at a quiet tea room near Regent Street. Hastings, ever the loyal friend, was brimming with enthusiasm. "A new case, Poirot. I knew you couldn't stay idle for long. What's it about? Murder, blackmail, international intrigue?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Patience, Hastings. It is a case from the past, one I thought finished, but it seems the past is not so easily buried." He recounted the letter, the key, and the shadows of Montague Manor, careful to omit the personal connection to Julian. Hastings listened, his eyes wide, already imagining himself at Poirot's side, chasing clues through the Kentish countryside. "We'll solve it, old chap," he said, clapping Poirot on the shoulder. "Just like the old days." Poirot smiled, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The old days, he knew, were gone. This case was different, not just a puzzle, but a reckoning. He sipped his tea, the delicate china cup, a stark contrast to the weight of his task. Clara Montague was out there, in memory or in truth, and he would find her. The letter from Eleanor V was a spark, and Poirot was the flame that would burn. Away the lies. The day ended with Poirot back in his flat, the key and letter once again before him. He had made progress, but it was only the beginning. The manor awaited, its secrets locked behind walls of stone and time. He closed his eyes, picturing Clara's portrait, her eyes pleading across the years. "I will find you, mademoiselle," he whispered, "and I will not turn away this time." The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian with the formidable mind, prepared to face the case he had kept hidden for so long. Chapter 2. The Vanished Heiress. The fog hung low over London in the autumn of 1923, draping the city in a shroud of mystery that seemed to cling to every cobblestone and gaslit street. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored overcoat and polished shoes, stepped briskly along Baker Street, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the damp pavement. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and wet leaves, and the faint clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the distant rumble of motors. Poirot's mind, however, was far from the bustle of the city. His thoughts were consumed by a letter, delivered that morning to his modest but meticulously arranged flat, summoning him to a case that promised to test even his formidable intellect. The letter had been brief, penned in the elegant hand of a woman named Mrs. Evelyn Montague, matriarch of one of London's wealthier families. Her daughter, Clara Montague, a young heiress of considerable fortune, had vanished 3 days prior without a trace. The police, Mrs. Montague wrote, had been of little help, dismissing Clara's absence as the impulsive whim of a spoiled young woman. But Mrs. Montague was certain something darker was afoot. "You, Monsieur Poirot," the letter concluded, "are my last hope. I implore you to come to our home in Mayfair at once." Poirot's curiosity had been piqued, not merely by the mystery of a missing heiress, but by the undercurrent of fear in Mrs. Montague's words. He had seen such fear before, fear that masked secrets, fear that hinted at truths too dangerous to speak aloud. As he approached the Montague residence, a grand Georgian townhouse with tall windows and ivy creeping up its brick facade, he adjusted his moustache and steeled himself for what lay ahead. The door was opened by a butler, a gaunt man with a face as expressionless as a marble statue. "Monsieur Poirot?" he inquired, his voice low and precise. "Oui, c'est moi," Poirot replied, handing over his card with a flourish. "I am expected." The butler led him through a cavernous hall adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow Poirot as he passed. The air inside was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old money, but there was something else, tension, palpable and unsettling. Poirot's sharp eyes noted every detail, the faint scuff on the floor where a rug had been hastily moved, the slight tremor in the butler's hand as he opened the drawing-room door. Mrs. Evelyn Montague rose. To greet him, a tall woman in her late 50s, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her face, though handsome, was etched with worry, and her hands twisted a lace handkerchief as she spoke. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. I am at my wit's end." "Madame, I am at your service," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "Tell me, if you please, all that you know of your daughter's disappearance." Mrs. Montague gestured for him to sit, and as he settled into a plush armchair, she began her tale. Clara, she explained, was 22, spirited and beautiful, with a fortune inherited from her late father, a shipping magnate. She had been preparing for her debut into society, a grand ball planned for the following month, when she vanished. She left no note, no explanation, Mrs. Montague said, her voice trembling. Her maid found her room empty, her bed unslept in, her jewellery, her clothes all untouched. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled before him. "And the police, what have they done?" "Precious little," Mrs. Montague said bitterly. "They searched her room, questioned the staff, but they believe she ran off with some suitor. Clara would never do such a thing. She is headstrong, yes, but not reckless." Poirot nodded, his mind already sifting through possibilities. "Tell me, madame, did Clara have enemies? Or perhaps secrets?" Mrs. Montague hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window. Clara was private. She confided in few, but enemies? No, I cannot imagine it. She was beloved. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Beloved, perhaps, but not without secrets. No one vanished so completely without reason. "I must see her room," he said, rising, "and I will speak with the household. Every detail, no matter how small, may be significant." Mrs. Montague led him upstairs, her steps slow and deliberate. Clara's room was at the end of a long corridor, its door slightly ajar. The room itself was a study in elegance, a four-poster bed draped in silk, a mahogany vanity strewn with silver brushes, and tall windows overlooking the misty street below. Yet Poirot's trained eye caught the subtle signs of disturbance. Drawer left slightly open, a rug askew, a faint smudge on the window pane. He moved methodically, examining every surface. The vanity held a small photograph of Clara, a striking young woman with dark curls and a mischievous smile. Beside it was a locket, its clasp broken, as though it had been torn from its chain. Poirot opened it to find a tiny portrait of a man, his features obscured by a crack in the glass. "Who is this?" he asked, holding up the locket. Mrs. Montague frowned. I don't know. Clara never spoke of anyone special." Poirot slipped the locket into his pocket, his mind racing. A lover, perhaps, or someone more dangerous. He knelt to inspect the rug, noting a faint outline in the dust beneath a rectangular shape, as though a box or case had been removed. "Was anything missing from the room?" he asked. "The maid said nothing was gone," Mrs. Montague replied. "But I confess, I haven't looked closely." Poirot's attention shifted to the window. The smudge on the pane was faint, but it bore the distinct shape of a fingerprint. He produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket and studied it closely. "This mark," he said, "it is fresh. Someone touched this glass recently, perhaps in haste." Mrs. Montague paled. "You think someone took her from this very room?" "It is possible," Poirot said, his tone measured. "But I do not yet know. I must speak with the household. Who was here the night Clara disappeared?" Mrs. Montague listed the occupants, herself, her brother-in-law, Sir Reginald Montague, Clara's uncle, her nephew, Lionel Montague, Clara's cousin, the butler, Mr. Grayson, the maid, Emily. And the cook, Mrs. Baxter. We had no guests, she added. It was a quiet evening. Poirot nodded, committing the names to memory. I will begin. With the maid, Emily. She found the room empty, yes. Emily was summoned, a nervous girl of 19, with wide eyes and trembling hands. She stood before Poirot, twisting her apron as she recounted the morning of Clara's disappearance. I came in at 6, sir, like always, she said. The bed was made, but not slept in. Miss Clara's nightgown was on the chair, but her day clothes were still in the wardrobe. I thought maybe she'd gone for a walk, but she never came. Back, Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you saw nothing unusual? No strangers, no sounds in the night? Emily hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Montague. Well, I did hear something, sir. Late, maybe midnight. A creak, like someone on the stairs. But I thought it was just the house settling. Poirot made a mental note. A creak at midnight innocent, perhaps, but worth investigating. Thank you, Emily. You may go. Next, he spoke with Sir Reginald Montague, an imposing man in his 60s, with a booming voice and a penchant for brandy. He lounged in the library, a cigar in hand, and regarded Poirot with thinly veiled skepticism. Clara's run off, mark my words, he said. She's always been flighty, probably eloped with some penniless artist. Poirot's moustache twitched. You seem certain, monsieur. Yet her mother believes otherwise. Tell me, where were you the night Clara disappeared? Sir Reginald bristled. In my study, working late. I retired around 1. Didn't see or hear a thing. And your relationship with Clara? Poirot pressed. You were close. She's my niece, Sir Reginald said curtly. I cared for her, but she was stubborn, always chasing dreams instead of duty. Poirot noted the edge in his voice. Duty, he thought, a word that often masked greed. He thanked Sir Reginald and moved on to Lionel Montague, Clara's cousin, a lean young man of 25, with a nervous smile and darting eyes. Lionel was in the conservatory, tending to a collection of exotic plants, when Poirot approached. Monsieur Lionel, Poirot began, you were close to your cousin Clara, yes. Lionel's smile faltered. We were. Friendly Clara was always kind, but she kept to herself. I saw her at dinner the night before she vanished. She seemed distracted. Distracted how? Poirot asked, his gaze piercing. She kept looking at her locket, Lionel said, fiddling with it like it was important. I asked her about it, but she changed the subject. Poirot's interest deepened. The locket again. And where were you that night? In my room, reading, Lionel said quickly. I went to bed early. Didn't hear anything unusual. Poirot thanked him, his mind churning. Lionel's answers were to pat, to rehearsed. He resolved to watch the young man closely. The butler, Mr. Grayson, was next, his demeanour as stiff as his starched collar. He claimed to have been in the servants' quarters all evening, preparing for the next day's duties. I heard nothing, sir, he said. The house was quiet, and Miss Clara, Poirot asked, did she seem troubled to you? Grayson's eyes flickered. She was restless, sir. The day before she disappeared, I saw her in the garden, speaking to someone. A man, I think, but I couldn't see his face. Poirot's pulse quickened. A man. Describe him, if you please. Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low, Grayson said. They were near the gate, speaking in low voices. I thought it improper to eavesdrop. Poirot dismissed Grayson, his mind racing. A A mysterious man, a locket, a creak in the night pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. He returned to Clara's room, determined to uncover more. This time, he examined the wardrobe, noting that one dresser, simple blue frock, was missing, though Emily had claimed all her clothes were accounted for. A lie, perhaps, or an oversight. He moved to the fireplace, where a faint trace of ash caught his eye. Kneeling, he sifted through the cinders and found a scrap of paper, partially burned. The words were faint but legible. "Meet me, midnight." Gate Poirot's heart raced. A rendezvous, planned in secret, but with whom and why? As evening fell, Poirot joined the family for dinner. Observing them closely, Mrs. Montague was subdued, her eyes red from crying. Sir Reginald dominated the conversation, railing against Clara's foolishness. Lionel picked at his food, his gaze darting to the door. The servants moved silently, their faces betraying nothing. Yet Poirot sensed the undercurrents: fear, guilt, deception. After dinner, he slipped into the garden, following the path to the gate where Grayson had seen Clara with the mysterious man. The ground was soft from recent rain, and Poirot's sharp eyes spotted a footprint, partially obscured by leaves. It was a man's boot, deep and deliberate, as though he had stood there for some time. Nearby, caught on a thorn, was a scrap of fabric blue, like the missing dress. Poirot's mind worked furiously. Clara had met someone at midnight, wearing the blue dress. Had she left willingly, or was she taken? The locket, the note, the footprint, they pointed to a plan, but whose? And why had no one reported her missing until morning? He returned to the house, determined to question Emily again. The maid was in the kitchen, scrubbing pots, when Poirot approached. "Emily," he said gently, "you told me all of Clara's. Clothes were in her room, yet a blue dress is missing. Why did you not mention this?" Emily's face paled. I didn't notice, sir. I swear it." Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes were relentless. "You heard a creak that night. You saw the dress. You know more than you say. Tell me, mademoiselle, what are you hiding?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "I can't, sir. They'll hurt me." "Who?" Poirot pressed. "Who threatens?" "You." Emily shook her head, sobbing. "I promised Miss Clara. I swore I wouldn't tell." Poirot's heart sank. Clara had trusted Emily, but with what? A secret lover? A plan to flee? He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You must. Trust me, Emily. I will protect you. But I must know the truth." Emily wiped her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Miss Clara, she was in love, sir, with a man no one approved of. She said she was going to run away with him. That night she told me to keep quiet, no matter what happened." Mind raced. "This man, who was he?" "I don't know his name," Emily said. "But he was foreign, Belgian, I think. Miss Clara met him during the war, when she volunteered at the hospital." A Belgian. Poirot's blood ran cold. He had known many Belgians in London, refugees from the war, men and women with their own secrets. Could one of them be tied to Clara's fate? And why had she kept this man's identity hidden? "Thank you, Emily," Poirot said, his voice calm but his mind in turmoil. "You have been most helpful." As he left the kitchen, the weight of the case pressed upon him. Clara Montague had not simply vanished. She had been drawn into a web of love, betrayal, and danger. The locket, the note, the footprint, the dress, they were threads in a tapestry Poirot was only beginning to unravel. But one thing was certain: The truth lay hidden in the shadows of the Montague household, and he would not rest until he brought it to light. The night deepened, and Poirot sat in his guest room, the locket in his hand. He studied the cracked portrait, willing it to reveal its secrets. A Belgian, Emily had said, a man from the war. Poirot's own past as a refugee flickered in his mind, faces, names, moments of loss. Could this case be tied to his own history? He pushed the thought aside. Sentiment must not cloud his judgment. Tomorrow he would confront the family again, probing deeper into their alibis and motives. Sir Reginald's bluster, Lionel's nervousness, Grayson's reserve, they all hid something. And the mysterious Belgian, the man in the locket, who was he, and what had he meant to Clara? Poirot set the locket on the table and leaned back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. The little grey cells, as he called them, were at work, sorting, analysing, connecting. Clara Montague was out there, alive or dead, and he would find her. For now, the fog of London mirrored the fog of the case, thick, impenetrable, but not eternal. The truth, like the sun, would eventually break through. He closed his eyes, the rhythm of his breathing steady, and prepared for the challenges of the days ahead. The vanished heiress was more than a Casey, was a puzzle, a challenge to his intellect, and a reminder that even in the darkest mysteries, Hercule Poirot would prevail. Chapter 3. The Manor of Shadows. The train from London to the countryside rattled along, its rhythmic clatter a steady companion to Hercule Poirot's thoughts. The city's bustle had faded behind him, replaced by rolling hills and patches of woodland that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. In his gloved hand he held the letter from his client, Lord Reginald Montague, its crisp edges worn from repeated reading. The words were formal, almost curt, requesting his immediate assistance in the matter of Clara Montague's disappearance. Yet there was an undercurrent of urgency, a plea veiled in aristocratic restraint, that piqued Poirot's curiosity. Clara, the young heiress to the Montague fortune, had vanished from the family's ancestral home, Montague Manor, 3 nights prior. No ransom note, no witnesses, no trace. The local constabulary, Lord Reginald wrote, had proven inadequate. Poirot, with his reputation for unravelling the impossible, was their last hope. As the train slowed, Poirot adjusted his impeccable moustache and gathered his belongings. Small leather satchel containing his essentials and a notebook for the little grey cells to record their observations. The station at Ashford Hollow was a modest affair, little more than a platform and a weathered signpost. A chauffeur in a stiff uniform awaited him, his face as unreadable as the grey sky. Above, "Monsieur Poirot?" the man asked, tipping his cap. Poirot nodded, and they set off in a sleek Rolls-Royce, the road winding through hedgerows and past stone walls that seemed to guard the secrets of the land. Montague Manor loomed into view. As they crested a hill, a sprawling edifice of ivy-clad stone that seemed to grow out of the earth itself. Its towers and gables cut sharp silhouettes against the overcast sky, and the windows glinted like watchful eyes. The manor was grand, yes, but there was an air of decay about it. Cracked gargoyles perched on the roofline, and the once manicured gardens now tangled with weeds. Poirot's first impression was one of a house that had seen too many secrets, its walls heavy with the weight of unconfessed sins. The car crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, and Poirot was ushered into the manor's cavernous entrance hall. The air was cool and musty, scented with old wood and wax polish. A grand staircase swept upward, flanked by portraits of stern-faced Montagues, whose eyes seemed to follow him. Lord Reginald awaited him at the foot of the stairs, a tall man in his late 50s with a hawkish nose and a demeanour that suggested he was accustomed to command. His handshake was firm but brief, his eyes shadowed with worry. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice clipped, "your reputation precedes you. I trust you'll make quick work of this unpleasantness." Poirot inclined his head. "I assure you, my lord, Hercule Poirot does not rest until the truth is revealed. But I must have all the facts, and I must see all who reside in this house. The smallest detail, it may be the key." Lord Reginald's lips tightened, but he nodded. "Very well. My family and staff are at your disposal. Clara's disappearance has shaken us all. She was a spirited girl, prone to whims, but to vanish without a word, it's unthinkable." He led Poirot to a drawing-room adorned with velvet drapes and heavy oak furniture. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled household. Poirot took his place near the fireplace, his small stature somehow commanding the room's attention. He studied each person in turn, his sharp eyes missing nothing. There was Lady Eleanor Montague, Lord Reginald's wife, a pale woman with delicate features and a nervous habit of twisting her pearl necklace. Her eyes darted to her husband at every question, as if seeking permission to speak. Beside her sat their son, Edward Montague, a lanky young man in his early 20s with a sullen expression and a cigarette dangling from his fingers. His cousin, Beatrice Langley, was a striking contrast, vibrant and sharp-tongued, her auburn hair pinned in a modern style that clashed with the manor's antiquity. She met Poirot's gaze with a boldness that bordered on defiance. The staff were no less intriguing. Mrs. Agnes Harrow, the housekeeper, was a stout woman with a face like carved granite, her hands clasped tightly as if guarding secrets of her own. The butler, Mr. Thomas Finch, stood ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on a point above Poirot's head. A young maid, Lily Carter, hovered near the door, her apron pristine but her hands trembling slightly. And then there was Dr. Alistair Crane, the family's physician and advisor, a lean man with a scholarly air and a habit of adjusting his spectacles when questioned. Poirot began with the facts, his voice precise and measured. "Mademoiselle Clara, she was last seen 3 nights ago, in her room or elsewhere." Lord Reginald cleared his throat. "Her room, she retired early, claiming a headache. The next morning, her bed was empty, her window open. No one heard a sound, and the window Poirot pressed. It was locked or unlocked." "Locked," Mrs. Harrow interjected, her voice firm. "I checked it myself that evening. Clara was particular about drafts." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and yet it was open in the morning. "Curious, Nan. And no one saw or heard anything unusual." That night, a chorus of denials followed, each voice overlapping in a rush to assert innocence. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "Bon, then we shall reconstruct the events. I must see Mademoiselle Clara's room, and I must speak with each of you alone. The truth, it hides in the details." Clara's room was on the 2nd floor, a spacious chamber with heavy drapes and a 4-poster bed. The air was stale, as if the room had been sealed since her disappearance. Poirot moved methodically, his gloved fingers brushing over surfaces, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. The bed was neatly made, the pillows undisturbed. The window, now closed, showed no signs of tampering, its latch intact. A vanity table held a silver hairbrush, a few pins, and a small porcelain figurine of a ballerina, its delicate arm chipped. Poirot paused at the wardrobe, noting a faint scuff mark on the floorboards nearby, as if something heavy had been dragged. He turned to Mrs. Harrow, who had accompanied him. "This mark, it is recent." The housekeeper's eyes flicked to the floor, then away. "I suppose it could be. The maids are thorough, but they might have missed it." Poirot's moustache twitched. Missed or ignored. "Tell me, Madame Harrow, what was Mademoiselle Clara like?" Mrs. Harrow hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "She was kind, sir, but headstrong. Always reading those novels, dreaming of adventure. She'd clash with his lordship over her future marriage, mostly. He had plans for her, but Clara, she had her own ideas." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. He dismissed the housekeeper and continued his inspection, his mind turning over the possibilities. A headstrong heiress, a locked room, an open window. Which piece of the puzzle was a thread, and Poirot was determined to weave them together. His interviews with the household began that afternoon. Conducted in the manor's library, a room lined with leather-bound tomes and lit by a single chandelier. Lord Reginald was first, his answers clipped and rehearsed. Clara, he insisted, had no enemies, no reason to run away. She was to inherit a fortune, he said, his voice tight. Why would she leave? Perhaps, Poirot suggested, she did not leave willingly. Lord Reginald's face darkened, but he offered no further insight. Lady Eleanor was next, her voice barely above a whisper. She spoke of Clara's beauty, her charm, but her hands trembled as she recounted the night of the disappearance. "I heard nothing," she said, twisting her pearls. "I wish I had." Edward Montague was less forthcoming, his answers laced with sarcasm. "Clara was a dreamer," he said, exhaling smoke. "Always talking about running off to Paris or some nonsense. Maybe she finally did it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you, Monsieur Edward, did you approve of her dreams?" Edward shrugged. "Didn't care either way. She was a cousin, not my responsibility." Beatrice Langley, by contrast, was a whirlwind of energy. "Clara was my friend," she declared, leaning forward in her chair. "She wasn't the type to just vanish. Someone did this to her, Monsieur Poirot. You must find out who, and you suspect someone?" Poirot asked, his tone neutral. Beatrice hesitated, then leaned closer. "Uncle Reginald, he was furious about Clara's refusal to marry Lord Whitmore, and Edward, he's always resented her inheritance, but I've no proof, only feelings." The staff offered little more clarity. Finch, the butler, claimed to have been in the servants' quarters all night, a claim Mrs. Harrow corroborated. Lily, the maid, was near tears, insisting she'd seen Clara in her room at 9 o'clock, looking pale but calm. Dr. Crane, the last to be interviewed, was measured and precise. His medical opinion that Clara had shown no signs of distress in the days prior. Yet Poirot noted the doctor's frequent glances at his watch, as if eager to be elsewhere. As evening fell, Poirot retired to his guest room, a modest chamber with a view of the manor's darkened gardens. He sat at a small desk, his notebook open, and began to sketch a timeline of the night Clara vanished. The locked room, the open window, the scuff mark all pointed to a carefully staged scene. But by whom and why? Dinner that night was a tense affair, served in a dining room dominated by a crystal chandelier and a long mahogany table. The family ate in near silence, their glances darting to Poirot, as if expecting him to produce Clara from thin air. He observed them closely, noting the way Lord Reginald's hand tightened on his wineglass, the way Lady Eleanor avoided her son's gaze, the way Beatrice's eyes lingered on Edward with barely concealed suspicion. After dinner, Poirot took a solitary walk through the manor's grounds, his cane tapping softly on the gravel paths. The air was damp, the moon obscured by clouds, and the manor loomed behind him like a silent sentinel. He paused at a stone fountain, its basin choked with leaves, and considered the motives at play. Money, always a powerful force, was at the heart of the Montague fortune. Clara's inheritance would pass to her closest kin if she were declared dead, a fact that cast a shadow over Edward and Beatrice. Yet there was something else, something personal, that Poirot could not yet name. Returning to the manor, he found Lily Carter in the hallway, polishing a silver candelabrum. She started at his approach, nearly dropping the cloth. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't see you." "Pardon, mademoiselle," he said gently. "A question, if I may." "You said mademoiselle?" Clara was pale that night. "Did she say anything to you?" "Anything at all." Lily bit her lip, her eyes darting toward the staircase. She asked me to fetch her a glass of water, sir. But when I came back, she was staring out the window like she was waiting for someone. She thanked me, but her voice was strange, like she was afraid." Poirot's heart quickened. "Afraid, you say? And this was at 9 o'clock?" "Yes, sir. I left her then. I swear I locked the door behind me." Poirot thanked her and made his way to Clara's room once more, his mind racing. The maid's words suggested Clara had expected something or someone that night. He re-examined the window, noting its height from the ground. A ladder, perhaps, or a rope. But the lawn below showed no signs of disturbance, and the latch was undamaged. The locked door, the open window, it was a puzzle designed to confound. Over the next 2 days, Poirot immersed himself in the manor's rhythms, observing the household's routines and probing for weaknesses in their stories. He noted the tension between Lord Reginald and Edward, the former's disapproval of his son's indolence palpable. Lady Eleanor, he learned, spent hours in the manor's chapel, praying for Clara's return, though her piety seemed more performative than heartfelt. Beatrice, meanwhile, was often seen in the library, poring over old family records, her brow furrowed with determination. The staff, too, revealed subtle cracks. Mrs. Harrow was fiercely loyal to Lord Reginald, but Poirot caught her exchanging a sharp word with Finch when she thought no one was watching. Lily, despite her nervousness, seemed genuinely fond of Clara, her eyes welling up whenever the heiress was mentioned. Dr. Crane, however, remained an enigma, his calm demeanour unshaken even under Poirot's pointed questions. On the 3rd day, Poirot requested a tour of the manor's less frequented areas, the attics, the cellars, the servants' passages. Lord Reginald hesitated, but relented, assigning Finch to guide him. The butler led Poirot through narrow corridors and dusty rooms, his expression impassive. In the attic, Poirot found a trunk filled with old letters and photographs, many of Clara as a child, her smile bright and untroubled. One photograph caught his eye. Clara, no older than 16, standing beside a young man in a soldier's uniform. The man's face was familiar, though Poirot could not place it. He tucked the photograph into his pocket, intending to investigate. Further, the cellar was damp and dimly lit, its stone walls lined with wine racks and crates. Poirot's cane tapped against the floor, the sound echoing in the stillness. He paused at a corner where the dust was disturbed, as if something had been moved recently. Kneeling, he found a small brass key, its surface tarnished but intact. Finch claimed ignorance, but Poirot noted the butler's slight flinch. That evening, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing-room, his demeanour grave. "Miss Amos," he began, "the disappearance of Mademoiselle Clara is no simple matter. There are contradictions, inconsistencies, that cannot be ignored. The locked room, the open window, these are not accidents. They are deliberate, designed to mislead. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily misled." He paced slowly, his eyes sweeping over their faces. "I have found a key, a small thing, yet significant. It does not fit Mademoiselle Clara's room, nor any door I have seen, and yet it was hidden, as if its purpose must remain secret. I ask you now, who among you knows of this key?" Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Lady Eleanor's pearls clicked softly as her hands shook. Edward stubbed out his cigarette, his jaw tight. Beatrice's eyes narrowed, as if piecing together her own puzzle. Finally, Dr. Crane spoke, his voice calm. "Monsieur Poirot, the manor is old. Keys are misplaced, forgotten. Surely this is no great revelation." Poirot's smile was thin, perhaps docteur, but the truth, it is like a mosaic. Each piece, however small, builds the picture, and I am close, very close, to seeing it clearly. The household dispersed, their unease palpable. Poirot retired to his room, the key safely in his satchel. He sat at his desk, the photograph of Clara and the soldier before him. The man's face nagged at his memory, a connection just out of reach. He closed his eyes, letting his little grey cells work, sifting through the details of the case. Clara's fear, Lily had said, waiting for someone, the scuff mark by the wardrobe, the key in the cellar, the photograph, each was a thread. And Poirot sensed they were converging. He opened his notebook and wrote, "The manor hides more than secrets. It hides a truth someone will kill to protect." The next morning, Poirot requested a private meeting with Beatrice. She arrived in the library, her expression wary but curious. "You've found something," she said, more statement than question. "Oui," Mademoiselle Poirot replied, "but I need your candor. You knew Clara better than most. Did she ever speak of a soldier, a man from her past?" Beatrice's eyes widened, then softened. She mentioned someone once. A Belgian, a refugee. From the war she met him in London, years ago. They were close, but Uncle Reginald forbade her from seeing him. She never told me his name. Poirot's heart skipped. A Belgian refugee. The photograph. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. He thanked Beatrice and excused himself, his mind racing. The soldier was the key, not the brass one, but the man himself. Clara's fear, her plan to meet someone, it all pointed to him. That afternoon, Poirot confronted Lord Reginald in his study. "My lord," he said, producing the photograph, "this man, who is he?" Lord Reginald's face paled. "Where did you get this?" "The attic," Poirot said simply. "Now, tell me, who is he, and what was his connection to Mademoiselle?" Clara, Lord Reginald, sank into his chair, his composure crumbling. His name was Julien Dubois, and nobody, a refugee Clara met during the war. She fancied herself in love with him. I put an end to it. He was beneath her, unfit for the Montague. Name. And yet, Poirot said softly, she never forgot him. Did she plan to meet him that night? Lord Reginald's silence was answer enough. Poirot left the study, his mind ablaze. Julien Dubois, a name, at last. But where was he now? And How did he fit into the locked room, the open window, the scuff mark? The day passed in a blur of questions and observations. Poirot re-examined Clara's room, focusing on the wardrobe. The scuff mark suggested it had been moved, but why? He inspected its interior, tapping the panels until a faint hollow sound rewarded his efforts. With careful pressure, he found a hidden compartment, barely large enough for a small box. Inside was a letter, its ink faded but legible, addressed to Clara from Julian. It spoke of love, of a plan to run away together, to start anew far from the Montagues' reach. The letter was dated 3 days before her disappearance. Poirot's pulse quickened. Clara had planned to flee, but someone had stopped her. The locked room, the open window, it was a facade, a distraction from the truth. He returned to the cellar, the brass key in hand, and began testing every lock he could find. At last, in a forgotten storeroom, he found a door, its lock rusted but functional. The key turned with a satisfying click. Beyond the door was a narrow passage, its walls damp and moss-covered. Poirot followed it, his cane steady, until it opened into a small chamber. The air was thick with dust, and in the center lay a single object, a woman's shoe, its leather scuffed and stained. Clara's shoe, he was certain. The chamber was a dead end, but its existence was a revelation. The manor had secrets, and this was one of them. Poirot emerged from the passage, his mind alight with possibilities. The shoe, the letter, the photograph, they painted a picture of betrayal, of a plan thwarted. But by whom? Lord Reginald, desperate to control his niece's future. Edward, envious of her inheritance. Or someone else, someone whose motives were still hidden. That night, Poirot lay awake, the manor's silence oppressive. He thought of Clara, her dreams of freedom, her love for a man deemed unworthy. He thought of the soldier, Julian, and the war that had brought him to England, to Poirot's own past. The connection was there, tantalizingly close, but he needed one final piece to complete the mosaic. The following morning, Poirot summoned Dr. Crane to the library. "Doctor," he said, his voice low, "you have been most helpful, but there is one matter I must clarify. You were in London during the war. Did you ever meet a man named Julian Dubois?" Crane's hand froze on his spectacles. "I don't recall the name." Poirot's smile was sharp. "A pity, because I believe you did, and I believe you know more about Mademoiselle Clara's fate than you have admitted." Crane's composure held, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Poirot pressed on, his voice relentless. The shoe in the hidden chamber, the letter in the wardrobe, the key in the cellar. They tell a story, Docteur, and you are part of it. Shall I tell you what I think? He leaned forward, his words precise. Clara planned to elope with Julian Dubois. She confided in someone, perhaps you, her trusted physician. But that someone betrayed her. The locked room, the open window, it was a charade, meant to suggest she fled. But she never left the manor. She was stopped, hidden, perhaps harmed, in that secret chamber. And you, Docteur, you know who did it. Crane's face was ashen, but he said nothing. Poirot rose, his cane tapping the floor. "Think on it, Docteur. The truth, it cannot be hidden forever." As Poirot left the library, he felt the weight of the case pressing down on him. Clara's fate was within his grasp, but the final revelation eluded him. The Manor of Shadows had one more secret to yield, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it was his. Chapter 4. clues in the dust. The Montague manor loomed under the grey shroud of a late autumn afternoon, its stone facade as unyielding as the secrets it harboured. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes clicking softly on the gravel path, paused to survey the estate. The air carried the damp chill of impending rain, and the windows of the manor stared down like eyes guarding a buried truth. He adjusted his overcoat, his gloved fingers brushing the brim of his hat, and murmured to himself, "The truth, it is always there in the details. One must only look with the eyes of precision." Inside, the grand hall was a study in faded opulence. The chandelier, though sparkling, hung heavy with cobwebs in its upper reaches, and the portraits lining the walls seemed to watch Poirot's every step. The butler, a gaunt man named Reynolds, with a face as expressionless as a blank page, had led him to the drawing room, where the family awaited. But Poirot had requested a moment alone first, to acquaint himself with the house. Reynolds, with a slight bow, had acquiesced. Leaving Poirot to his own devices, he began his exploration not with the family, but with the manor itself. A house, Poirot believed, was as much a witness as any person. Its walls, its floors, its forgotten corners, they held the imprint of events, if one knew how to read them. And Poirot, with his meticulous mind, was a master reader. His first stop was the library, a vast room lined with bookshelves that stretched to the vaulted ceiling. The scent of old leather and dust greeted him as he entered, and he noted that heavy velvet curtains drawn against the daylight, casting the room in a perpetual twilight. A long oak table dominated the centre, its surface cluttered with papers, inkwells, and a single candelabrum, its candles half melted from use. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the smallest details. A chair slightly askew, a book left open on a side table, its pages yellowed but unmarked. He approached the table and examined the papers. Most were of business, invitations to social events, a ledger detailing household expenses. But one item caught his attention, a small, torn piece of paper tucked beneath a blotting pad. It was no larger than a calling card, its edges frayed as though ripped in haste. The ink was faded, but Poirot could make out a few words: meet, midnight, garden. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and the paper bore the faint scent of lavender. He slipped it into his pocket, his mind already turning over its implications. A rendezvous, perhaps, he mused, but for whom, and why the secrecy? Next, he turned to the bookshelves. Many of the volumes were classic Dickens, Austen, Shakespeare, but a few were more obscure, their spines cracked from frequent handling. One, a slim volume of poetry by Tennyson, was slightly out of alignment with its neighbours. Poirot, ever attuned to such irregularities, pulled it from the shelf. As he did, a small object fell to the floor with a soft clink. He bent to retrieve it, a locket, silver and heart-shaped, its surface engraved with delicate filigree. The clasp was stiff, but with a gentle nudge, it opened to reveal a miniature portrait of a young woman. Her features were striking high cheekbones, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet defiance. "Clara Montague," Poirot whispered, recognizing her from the photograph her father had provided. But why was the locket hidden here, behind a book, and why had no one mentioned it? He closed the locket and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket alongside the torn paper. The library had already yielded to clues, and Poirot's little grey cells were buzzing with possibilities. But he was not done. He moved to the fireplace, its grate cold and filled with ash. Kneeling, he examined the hearth, his gloved fingers sifting through the debris. Most of it was the expected residue of burnt wood, but among the ashes he found a scrap of fabric, no larger than a postage stamp. It was silk, pale blue, and singed at the edges. Poirot held it to the light, noting its fine weave. A lady's garment, perhaps, he said softly. But why burned? To conceal what? The library had given him much to ponder, but Poirot knew the manor held more secrets. He left the room and made his way to the upper floors, where Clara's bedroom lay. The corridor was lined with heavy oak doors, each bearing a brass nameplate. Clara's room was at the far end, its door slightly ajar. Poirot paused before entering, his hand resting on the knob. He felt a prickle of unease, as though the room itself were holding its breath. Inside, the bedroom was a time capsule. The bed was made, its coverlet pristine, and the wardrobe stood open, revealing a row of dresses in muted colors. A vanity table held a silver hairbrush, a bottle of perfume, and a small jewelry box, its contents untouched. The air was heavy with the scent of disuse, and a thin layer of dust coated every surface. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Dust," he said, "is a most excellent witness. It tells us what has been touched and what has not." He began with the vanity, noting that the perfume bottle was slightly askew, as though someone had handled it. Recently, the jewelry box contained a few modest pieces pearl earrings, a cameo brooch, but nothing as significant as the locket he'd found in the library. He moved to the bed, lifting the coverlet to inspect the mattress. Nothing. The wardrobe was next, and here, too, he found little of note, save for a single glove, its partner missing. It was silk, pale blue, matching the scrap he'd found in the fireplace. "A coincidence," he murmured. "Nan, Poirot does not believe in coincidences." The room's most curious feature was a small writing desk by the window. Its surface was bare, save for a single sheet of stationery embossed with the Montague crest. The inkwell was dry, the pen untouched, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught something else, a faint indentation in the wood, as though something heavy had rested there and been removed. He ran his fingers over the surface, feeling the subtle grooves. "A diary, perhaps," he said, "or a box. Something was here, and now it is gone." He knelt to examine the floor beneath the desk, his magnifying glass in hand. The rug was slightly askew, and under it he found a single hairpin, its tip bent. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, but to Poirot it was another piece of the puzzle. "A lady in haste," he said. "She drops her pin, she does not notice. But why the haste? And where did she go?" The room had given him much, but Poirot's methodical mind demanded more. He moved to the window, its heavy curtains drawn back to reveal a view of the gardens below. The glass was streaked with rain, but Poirot's attention was drawn to the sill. There, in the dust, was a faint smudge, as though someone had pressed their fingers against it. He examined it closely, noting its size and shape. "A woman's hand," he said. "Small, delicate. Clara's, perhaps." The smudge was not the only anomaly. Beside it, partially obscured by the curtain, was a tiny scratch in the wood, barely visible. Poirot traced it with his finger, following its path, to a small latch hidden in the window frame. He pressed it, and with a soft click, a panel in the wall slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a single item, a folded letter, its wax seal broken. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but Poirot could make out the salutation: "My dearest Clara." He unfolded it carefully, his heart quickening. The letter was brief, written in a hurried hand. My dearest Clara, the plan is set. Meet me in the garden at midnight. We will leave together as we always dreamed. Trust no one, not even those closest. To you they watch, they scheme. Burn this when you have read it. Yours forever, E. Poirot. Read it twice, committing every word to memory. The initials E offered no immediate clarity, but the tone of the letter urgent, secretive confirmed his suspicions. Clara had been planning to flee, and someone had known. Someone had stopped her. He slipped the letter into his pocket, alongside the locket and the torn paper. The compartment held nothing else, but its existence was significant. A secret place, he said, for secret things, but not secret enough. The rain had begun to fall in earnest, pattering against the window. Poirot closed the panel and stepped back, his mind racing. The clues were mounting: a locket, a torn note, a scrap of silk, a glove, a hairpin, a smudge, a letter. Each was a thread in the tapestry of Clara's disappearance, and Poirot was determined to weave them together. He left the bedroom and made his way downstairs, where the family awaited. The drawing room was a stark contrast to the rest of the manor, its warmth almost oppressive. A fire roared in the hearth, and the Montagues sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a gallery of unease. There was Sir Henry Montague, Clara's father, his stern features softened by grief. Lady Margaret, her stepmother, whose cold beauty belied a sharp intellect. Edward, Clara's cousin, a nervous young man with darting eyes. And Beatrice, Clara's aunt, whose pious demeanour masked a calculating mind. The staff hovered at the Edges Reynolds, the butler, Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, and Lily, a young maid who seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. Poirot entered with his usual flourish, his cane tapping lightly on the floor. Madame Ety, messieurs, he said, his voice calm but commanding. I have begun my investigation, and already the manor speaks to me. It tells me of secrets, of things hidden in the dust. But I require your assistance. Tell me, who among you last saw Mademoiselle Clara? A heavy silence followed. Sir Henry cleared his throat, his voice rough. It was I the evening before. She vanished. We dined together, as always. She seemed distracted, but she said nothing of leaving. Poirot's eyes flicked to Lady Margaret, who sat ramrod straight, her hands folded in her lap. And you, madame, did you notice anything unusual? Lady Margaret's lips tightened. Clara was always a fanciful girl. She spoke of books, of poetry, but nothing out of the ordinary. I retired early that night. Edward shifted in his seat, his fingers twisting a handkerchief. I saw her in the garden that afternoon, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She was pacing. I asked if she was well, but she brushed me off. Beatrice, clutching a rosary, spoke next. I saw her at tea. She was quiet, but that was not unusual. Clara was never one for idle chatter. Poirot nodded, his gaze moving to the staff. And you, Mademoiselle Lily, you were close to Mademoiselle Clara, Nan. Lily's eyes widened, and she glanced nervously at Mrs. Harrow. I helped her dress that evening, sir. She was wearing her blue silk gown. She seemed anxious, but she wouldn't say why. Poirot's mind seized on the detail. Blue silk, the scrap in the fireplace, the glove in the wardrobe. Anxious. You say, did she mention anyone? A visitor, perhaps, or a letter? Lily shook her head, her hands trembling. No, sir. She just said she needed air and went to the garden. Mrs. Harrow interjected, her tone sharp. Lily, that's enough. You've said all you know. Poirot raised a hand, his expression mild but firm. Non, madame. Every detail is of importance. And you, Monsieur Reynolds? Did you see Mademoiselle Clara that night? Reynolds, standing by the door, inclined his head. I saw her cross the hall toward the garden door, sir, around 10 o'clock. I assumed she was taking a walk, as she often did. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing each response. The families. Accounts were consistent, yet something felt off. The details were too neat, too rehearsed, and none had mentioned the locket, the letter, or the rendezvous at midnight. He paced the room, his cane tapping rhythmically. The garden, it seems, is a place of significance. Tell me, who tends to it? Who has access? Sir Henry frowned. The gardener, old Tom, keeps it in order, but anyone in the household could walk there. It's not locked. Poirot smiled faintly. Mercy, I shall visit this garden. But first, I must ask, has anyone seen a locket, silver, with Mademoiselle Clara's portrait inside? A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Lady Margaret's hand twitched, Edward's eyes darted to the floor, and Beatrice's rosary clicked softly. Sir Henry's face darkened. A locket. No, Clara had many trinkets, but I don't recall one like that. Poirot's smile widened, though his eyes were sharp. Curio and a letter, perhaps. One written in haste, with a broken seal. The silence was deafening. Edward coughed. Lady Margaret's lips parted slightly, and Reynolds shifted his weight. Poirot noted each reaction, filing it away. Very well, he said. I shall continue my investigation. The truth, it is like dust, it settles in the quiet places, but it is always there, waiting to be found. He excused himself and stepped into the hall, his mind ablaze. The locket, the letter, the silk, they were pieces of a larger picture, but the frame was still missing. The garden, he decided, would be his next stop. Clara had been seen there, pacing, anxious, and the letter had mentioned a midnight meeting. If answers were to be found, the garden might hold them. The rain had eased to a drizzle as Poirot stepped outside, his umbrella shielding his immaculate suit. The garden was a labyrinth of hedges and flower beds, its paths winding toward a central fountain. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Poirot moved slowly, his eyes scanning the ground. Near the fountain, he paused. The gravel was disturbed, as though someone had scuffled there. He knelt, ignoring the damp, and found a small object half buried in the dirt, a cufflink silver engraved with the initial E. Mon Dieu, he whispered. Another E, the letter, and now this. Who are you, Monsieur E? He pocketed the cufflink and continued his search, moving toward a rose arbor at the garden's edge. The roses were wilted, their petals scattered on the ground, but something else caught his eye. A footprint, small and delicate, pressed into the mud. It was fresh, no older than a day, and beside it was a second print, larger, heavier. A man's, perhaps. Poirot measured them with his tape, noting their depth and shape. To people, he said, a meeting, perhaps, but when and why here? The arbor offered little else, but as Poirot turned to leave, he noticed a low stone bench tucked beneath the roses. Its surface was damp, but one corner was curiously dry, as though something had shielded it from the rain. He examined it closely, finding a faint stain red, like wine or blood. He scraped a sample with his knife, sealing it in a small envelope. "Another clue," he said. "But what does it tell us?" The garden had given him much, but the manor called him back. He returned to the drawing-room where the family remained, their tension palpable. Poirot did not sit. Instead, he stood by the fire, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mes amis," he said, "the garden is most illuminating. It tells me of meetings, of secrets, and it gives me this." He held up the cufflink, watching their faces. Edward paled, his hand flying to his sleeve. "That's mine," he stammered. "I must have lost it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Lost, you say? In the garden where Mademoiselle Clara was last seen. Curious Nan." Edward's mouth opened, but no words came. Lady Margaret rose, her voice icy. "This is absurd. Edward often walks in the garden. It means nothing." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps, but the manner, it continues to speak. A locket, a letter, a cufflink, a footprint, they are like crumbs leading to the truth. And Poirot, he follows." He left them in silence, their unease trailing him like a shadow. The day was waning, but Poirot's work was far from done. The manor was a maze of secrets, and he was only beginning to navigate it. Clara Montague was out there, somewhere, in the dust of memory, and Poirot would find her. He retired to his guest room, a small but comfortable space overlooking the garden. There, by the light of a single lamp, he laid out his clues: the locket, the torn paper, the silk scrap, the glove, the hairpin, the letter, the cufflink, the envelope with the stain. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was incomplete. He closed his eyes, letting his mind work, his little grey cells sifting through the details. The letter was the key, he decided. It spoke of a plan, a rendezvous, a betrayal. Clara had trusted someone, and that trust had led to her disappearance. But who was he? Edward, with his nervous demeanour and missing cufflink, or someone else, someone yet to emerge from the shadows? And why had the locket been hidden in the library, the silk burned in the fireplace? The answers were close. Poirot could feel it, but they remained just out of reach. He opened his notebook and began to write, his precise handwriting filling the page. Clues, locket silver, with Clara's portrait, hidden behind Tennyson in library torn paper. Meet. Midnight. Garden. Feminine hand. Lavender scent. Silk scrap. Pale blue. Burned in library fireplace. Glove. Pale blue silk. Single. In Clara's wardrobe. HAIRPIN -bent. Under Clara's desk. Smudgewoman's hand. On Clara's windowsill. Letter. My dearest Clara, signed E, hidden in window compartment. Cufflink silver, initial E. Found in garden. Footprints, woman single quotes, S and man's, near rose arbor. Stain, red, on garden bench. Possibly wine or blood suspicions and Edward and cufflink. Nervous behavior. Scene in garden. Lady Margaret, controlled, evasive, twitched at mention of locket. Lily, anxious, close to Clara. Mentioned blue silk gown. Reynolds saw Clara at 10, too composed, perhaps hiding something. E, the letter's author, possibly Edward, but could be another. Questions. Why hide the locket? Who placed it there? What was burned in the fireplace, and why? Who is E, and what was their plan with Clara? What caused the stain in the garden? Blood, or something else? Why was Clara's room untouched, yet the desk disturbed? Poirot closed the notebook, his mind still turning. The manor was a puzzle, and he was its solver. Tomorrow he would question the family further, press their alibis, and search for the missing pieces. Clara Montague's fate hung in the balance, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until he had uncovered the truth. The rain had stopped, and the manor was silent, save for the distant creak of settling wood. Poirot extinguished the lamp and stood by the window, gazing out at the garden. Somewhere out there in the shadows was the answer, and he would find it. Chapter 5. The alibi unravels. The morning sun cast a pale glow through the tall windows of Montague Manor, its light filtering through heavy drapes to illuminate the breakfast room where Hercule Poirot sat. His posture impeccable, his moustache impeccably waxed. The air was thick with the scent of toast and coffee, but beneath the civility of the meal lay a tension that clung to the room like damp fog. The Montague family, seated around the polished mahogany table, ate in near silence, their forks scraping against porcelain with deliberate care. Poirot's sharp eyes darted from face to face, noting the subtle tells the way Sir Reginald Montague, Clara's domineering uncle, gripped his knife too tightly, or how Clara's cousin, Evelyn, avoided meeting anyone's gaze, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. Poirot sipped his tisane, the herbal aroma grounding him as he prepared for the day's interrogations. The clues he had uncovered the previous evening, a misplaced locket, a torn letter fragment, had confirmed his suspicion that Clara Montague's disappearance was no mere flight of fancy. Someone in this household knew the truth, and Poirot was determined to unravel their carefully constructed alibis. He had already requested the family gather in the drawing room after breakfast, a summons that had elicited tight-lipped nods and furtive glances. The game, as he often thought of it, was afoot. The drawing room was a grand space, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Montagues, glaring down as if judging the living. A fire crackled in the hearth, though it did little to dispel the chill that seemed to emanate from the family itself. Sir Reginald stood by the mantel, his broad shoulders squared, exuding authority. Evelyn perched on a velvet settee, her delicate features drawn, while Clara's younger brother, Lionel, slouched in an armchair, his boyish face clouded with unease. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harrow, and the butler, Mr. Grayson, stood near the door, their expressions unreadable but their presence mandatory at Poirot's insistence. "Madame et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm yet commanding, "we are gathered to discuss the disappearance of Mademoiselle Clara Montague. I have examined the facts, and it is clear that the truth lies hidden among you. I ask for your cooperation, but I warn you, Hercule Poirot sees what others do not. Let us begin with the evening of Clara's disappearance, 3 nights ago. Where were each of you between the hours of 8 and midnight?" Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "I've told you, Poirot. I was in my study, reviewing estate accounts. I didn't leave until well past midnight. Grayson can confirm I rang for tea at 10:30. Poirot's eyes flicked to the butler, who nodded stiffly. "Indeed." "Sir, I brought the tea myself." "Merci, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, though his tone suggested he was far from satisfied. "And you, Mademoiselle Evelyn?" Evelyn's hands stilled on the napkin she'd been twisting. "I was in my room, reading." I didn't hear anything unusual." "Reading, you say?" Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "A most absorbing book, no doubt, to keep you so occupied while your cousin vanished. And you, Monsieur Lionel?" Lionel shifted uncomfortably, his cheeks flushing. "I was out walking in the gardens. It was a clear night, and I needed air. I didn't see Clara or anyone else. Poirot's lips pursed. A walk, alone, in the cold October air, most invigorating. And you, Madame Harrow? The housekeeper's face remained impassive. I was in the servants' quarters, overseeing the staff's duties. We were preparing for the next day's meals. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. And Monsieur Grayson, beyond delivering tea, where were you? I was in the pantry, organizing the silver, Grayson replied, his voice steady. I retired. To my room shortly after 11. Bon, Poirot said, though his eyes gleamed with skepticism. Each of you claims to have been alone, or nearly so, during the critical hours. Yet, I find it curious such a large household, and no one saw or heard anything of Mademoiselle Clara. Nan, this will not do. Let us examine these alibis more closely. He rose, pacing slowly before the fireplace, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Monsieur Reginald, you say you were in your study. Yet, when I examined the room yesterday, I observed that the ledgers on your desk were untouched, their pages free of ink, smudges, or annotations. For a man reviewing accounts, this is most unusual, n'est-ce pas? Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. I was reviewing, not writing. I keep my ledgers pristine. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone light, but his gaze piercing. But I also found a cigarette stub in the ashtray of a brand not found elsewhere. In the house, you do not smoke, Monsieur Reginald. Who, then, was in your study with you? The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire suddenly loud. Sir Reginald's face reddened. You're mistaken, Poirot. That stub must have been there for days. Poirot raised a finger. Non, monsieur. The ash was fresh, undisturbed by the maid's cleaning. Someone was with you, and you have not mentioned it. Why? Sir Reginald's eyes darted to Evelyn, then back to Poirot. I don't know what you're implying, but I was alone. Poirot turned to Evelyn, his expression softening but no less probing. Mademoiselle, you claim to have been reading. Yet, when I visited your room, I found no book on your bedside table, no bookmark in any volume. A dedicated reader, surely, would leave some trace of their pastime. Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came. After a moment, she murmured, I must have put the book away. Raymond Poirot's eyebrows rose. And what was the title of this book? It was Jane Eyre, she said quickly, too quickly. Poirot's smile was almost pitying. A fine choice, mademoiselle, but I took the liberty of inspecting. Your bookshelf? Jane Eyre was there, yes, but its spine was uncreased, its pages pristine. You have not read it recently, if at all. Evelyn's hands trembled, and she looked away, her composure fraying. Poirot pressed on, turning to Lionel. Monsieur Lionel, your walk in the gardens intrigues me. The ground was soft from recent rain, yet your boots, which I examined, bore no trace of mud. How is it that a man walks for hours in a garden and returns so clean? Lionel's flush deepened. I stayed on the gravel paths. Gravel paths, Poirot repeated, his tone sceptical. Yet the gravel is loose, and your boots would still show wear. Nan, monsieur, I think you were not in the gardens at all. Where were you truly? Lionel opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting to his uncle. Poirot's gaze followed, noting the silent exchange. Interesting, he murmured, then turned to the servants. Madame Harrow, Monsieur Grayson, your duties kept you busy, yet neither of you saw Mademoiselle Clara, who, according to the maids, was last seen descending the main staircase at 9 o'clock. The servants' quarters are near the staircase, are they not? How curious that you missed her. Mrs. Harrow's lips thinned. We were occupied, Mr. Poirot. The manor is large, and we cannot see everything. Perhaps, Poirot said, but the maids also mentioned that the pantry, where Monsieur Grayson claims to have been, was locked that evening. How, then, did you organize the silver? Grayson's composure faltered for the briefest moment. I meant the butler's office, not the pantry. A slip of the tongue. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A slip, indeed. The butler's office is on the opposite side of the house from the staircase. You would not have seen Mademoiselle Clara, even if she passed by. Yet, I wonder, were you truly there? The room was now thick with unease, the family and staff exchanging glances, their alibis unraveling under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. He paused, letting the silence weigh on them, then spoke again, his voice soft but commanding. Each of you has told me a story, but these stories do not align with the facts. The cigarette stub, the untouched book, the clean boots, the locked pantry, these are not mere oversights. They are lies, carefully constructed to conceal the truth about Mademoiselle Clara. I ask you now, who will speak first, before I uncover the rest? Sir Reginald slammed a fist on the mantel. This is outrageous. You accuse us without evidence, Poirot. I won't stand for it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Evidence, monsieur. I have it in abundance. The locket I found, inscribed with initials, not belonging to Clara, suggests a connection to someone in this house. The torn letter, with its mention of a meeting at 9, points to a rendezvous that went terribly wrong. And the footprints, yes, the footprints I found near the manor's rear entrance, leading to the woods. They were not Clara's, but they were fresh, made that very night. Someone left the house, and I intend to learn who. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lionel sank deeper into his chair, while Sir Reginald's face grew pale. Mrs. Harrow and Grayson remained stone-faced, but their eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Poirot continued, his voice rising slightly. You see, Ms. Amos, the truth is like a puzzle. Each piece, when placed correctly, reveals the whole. I am close to completing this puzzle, but I offer you a chance to speak before I do. No one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, until Evelyn's voice broke it, trembling but resolute. I wasn't reading. I was with Clara earlier that evening. We argued. The room froze. Sir Reginald's eyes widened, and Lionel sat up, staring at his cousin. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was racing. An argument, mademoiselle, about what? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to leave the family. She said she was tired of Uncle Reginald's control, of the expectations. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was furious. She said she had a plan, that she was meeting someone that night. I didn't tell anyone because I was ashamed. I thought she'd run off, and I didn't want to admit we'd fought. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. A plan, you say? And this meeting, who was it with? I don't know, Evelyn whispered. She wouldn't tell me. She just said it was someone who could help her start over. Poirot nodded, filing away this new piece of the puzzle. Mercy, Mademoiselle Evelyn. Your honesty is a start, but it raises more questions. If Clara was meeting someone, why did no one see this person? And why did her room, when I examined it, show signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, a broken vesiette. No one heard a sound. Sir Reginald stepped forward, his voice low. "You're suggesting foul play, Poirot. That's a serious accusation." "Oui, Monsieur Poirot said, meeting his gaze, "and I do not make it lightly, but the facts do not lie. Someone in this house knows what happened to Clara, and I will not rest until I uncover the truth." The interrogation continued for hours, Poirot circling back to each suspect, probing deeper, exposing more inconsistencies. Sir Reginald admitted to a heated discussion with Clara days before her disappearance, though he insisted it was unrelated. Lionel confessed to sneaking into the library that night, not the gardens, to read forbidden books. But he swore he saw nothing. Mrs. Harrow revealed that Clara had been asking about train schedules, suggesting she planned to leave, while Grayson admitted to overhearing a conversation between Clara and an unknown man in the hallway, though he claimed not to know the man's identity. By midday, the drawing room felt like a battlefield. The family's composure shattered, their secrets laid bare. Poirot stood at the centre, his mind a whirlwind of connections, each revelation bringing him closer to the truth. The locket, the letter, the footprints, Evelyn's argument, Grayson's eavesdropping, each was a thread in a tapestry of deception, and Poirot was determined to weave them together. As the clock struck noon, Poirot announced a break, allowing the family to disperse, though he requested they remain on the estate. He retired to the library, where he spread his notes across a table, his little grey cells working furiously. The alibis were crumbling, but the motive remained elusive. Was Clara's disappearance tied to her desire to escape her uncle's control, as Evelyn suggested? Or was there a deeper secret, perhaps linked to the mysterious man Grayson overheard? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Mrs. Harrow entered, her face pale. "Mr. Poirot," she said quietly, "there's something I didn't mention earlier. I found something in Clara's room the morning after she vanished. I didn't think it important, but now—" She held out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Poirot took it, his heart quickening. It was another fragment of the torn letter, and on it were scrawled 2 words: "Trust no one." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Madame Harrow. This is most illuminating. You have done well to bring it to me." As she left, Poirot studied the fragment, his mind racing. The letter, the locket, the footprints. And now this warning. Clara had been afraid, perhaps of someone in this very house. The alibis were unraveling, but the truth was still hidden, buried beneath layers of lies. Poirot straightened, his resolve hardening. He would find Clara Montague, alive or dead, and he would bring her justice. The afternoon brought more interrogations, Poirot focusing on the servants, whose proximity to the family gave them unique insight. He questioned the maids, who revealed Clara's growing restlessness, and the footman, who admitted to seeing a cloaked figure near the rear entrance that night, though he couldn't identify them. Each new detail added to Poirot's mental map, but the picture remained incomplete. By evening, the manor buzzed with tension, the family avoiding each other, their nerves frayed. Poirot dined alone, his thoughts consumed by the case. The locket's initials JL gnawed at him. Whose were they? The letter's fragments suggested a rendezvous, but with whom? And the footprints, why did they lead to the woods, yet show no return? As night fell, Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the family gathered once more, their faces drawn. He stood before them, his presence commanding. "Mies, Amos," he said, "we have made progress. but the truth remains elusive. I know, now that Clara planned to leave, that she argued with Mademoiselle Evelyn, that she met someone that night. I know of the cloaked figure, the locked pantry, the untouched ledgers, but I do not yet know why. Tomorrow I will search the woods, following the footprints. I will examine Clara's room again, for I believe it holds more secrets. And I will find the owner of the initials JL. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. If any of you wish to speak, to unburden your conscience, my door is open. But know this, Hercule Poirot does not fail. The truth will be revealed, and justice will be served. The family dispersed, their silence heavy with fear and suspicion. Poirot retired to his room, but sleep eluded him. He sat by the window, staring into the dark, his mind a whirlwind of clues and questions. The alibis had unraveled, but the heart of the mystery remained. Who was JL? What had Clara feared? And why had someone gone to such lengths to conceal the truth? As the clock struck midnight, a soft creak echoed in the hallway. Poirot froze, his senses alert. Someone was moving in the manor, someone who did not wish to be seen. He rose, slipping silently to the door, his hand on the knob. The game was far from over, and Hercule Poirot was ready for the next move. The night passed without incident, but Poirot's vigilance never wavered. By morning, he was ready to pursue the new leads, the footprints, the locket, the letter fragment. He began with the woods, following the faint trail he'd discovered, the earth still soft enough to preserve the marks. The footprints led to a small clearing, where Poirot found something glinting in the underbrush, a man's cufflink, engraved with the same initials, J.L. His heart quickened. This was no coincidence. The cufflink, the locket, pointed to a single individual, someone close to Clara, someone who had been in this clearing the night she vanished. Poirot pocketed the cufflink, his mind racing. He would confront the family again, but first, he needed to revisit Clara's room. The room was as he'd left it, the signs of a struggle still evident. Poirot examined every inch, his eyes catching on a loose floorboard near the bed. He pried it up, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a diary, its pages filled with Clara's elegant script. Poirot's pulse raced as he read, the entries detailing her growing fear, her plans to escape, and her secret meetings with a man named Julien Lefebvre, a Belgian refugee she'd met during the war. Julien Lefebvre, JL, the pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. Clara's diary spoke of love, but also of betrayal, of a plan gone wrong. She had trusted Julien, but she had also feared someone else in the house, someone who knew her plans. Poirot closed the diary, his resolve hardening. Julien Lefebvre was the key, but where was he now? Had he been the cloaked figure, or was he another victim of the conspiracy? And who, in the manor, had orchestrated Clara's fate? The day unfolded with more revelations, Poirot confronting each suspect with the new evidence. Sir Reginald denied knowing Julien, but his unease was palpable. Evelyn admitted to seeing Clara with a man in town weeks earlier, though she hadn't known his name. Lionel, surprisingly, broke down, confessing that he'd overheard Clara and Julien arguing in the library, though he swore he hadn't told anyone. By evening, Poirot was closer than ever to the truth, but the final piece eluded him. He gathered the family once more, the cufflink and diary in his possession, ready to force the issue. "Mise, Amiss," he said, his voice steady. "I have found the diary of Mademoiselle Clara. I know of Julien Lefebvre, of her plans, of her fears. I know. Of the cufflink, the locket, the letter. The truth is near, but one of you holds the final key. Speak now, or I will uncover it myself. The room was silent, the tension suffocating. Then, to everyone's shock, Mrs. Harrow stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "I can't stay silent any longer. I know. What happened to Clara? I saw it all." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Speak, madame. Tell me everything." And so, as the fire crackled and the portraits looked on, Mrs. Harrow began to unravel the final threads of the mystery, her words painting a picture of betrayal, greed, and a truth that would shake the Montague family to its core. Poirot listened, his mind piecing together the last fragments of the puzzle, knowing that the denouement was at hand. Chapter 6. A whisper of betrayal. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden rays through the tall windows of Montague Manor, bathing the grand drawing-room in a deceptive warmth. The air, however, was thick with tension, as if the very walls held their breath. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the opulent chaos of the room velvet drapes, mahogany furniture, and a chandelier that glittered like a constellation trapped indoors. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as he observed the assembled company with the precision of a watchmaker studying gears. The Montague family, their guests, and the manor's staff sat or stood in uneasy clusters, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Clara Montague's disappearance had stirred them like a stone dropped into a still pond, and Poirot's probing questions over the past 2 days had sent ripples of unease through the household. He had already uncovered a misplaced locket, a torn letter, and a series of alibis that creaked under scrutiny. But now, as the clock on the mantel chimed 4, Poirot sensed a new undercurrent or whisper of something more sinister than the lies he had already exposed. "Monsieur Poirot," said Sir Reginald Montague, Clara's uncle, from his armchair by the window. His voice was gruff, his silver hair glinting in the sunlight. "You've been poking about for days now. Have you found anything to explain where my niece has gone? Or are we to sit here indefinitely while you play at detective?" Poirot turned, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. "Patience, Sir Reginald. The truth, she is like a fine wine, requires time to reveal her full character. But I assure you, I am close to uncorking the bottle." A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Evelyn Montague, Sir Reginald's wife, shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, her delicate hands twisting a laced handkerchief. Her son, Charles, Clara's cousin, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. The other occupants, Clara's friend, Miss Beatrice Langley, the family solicitor, Mr. Harold Grayson, and the manor staff, including the butler, Mr. Wilkins, and the young maid Elsie, watched Poirot with varying degrees of apprehension. Poirot paced slowly before the fireplace, his polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor. "Let us review," he said, his Belgian accent lending a musical cadence to his words. Mademoiselle Clara Montague, a young heiress of considerable fortune, vanished from this manor 3 nights ago. Her room was found empty, her bed unslept in, and no trace of her departure. Yet I have discovered Clusa locket misplaced. A letter torn that suggests her disappearance was not, perhaps, as spontaneous as it first appeared. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And then there are the alibis, Sir Reginald. You claim you were in your study until midnight, yet the housemaid saw you in the east wing at 11:30. Lady Evelyn, You say you retired early, but the creak of floorboards suggests you were awake much later. Monsieur Charles, your evening walk in the gardens lacks a witness, and Mademoiselle Beatrice, your visit to Clara's room that night was curiously brief. Beatrice flushed, her green eyes flashing. I told you, I only stopped to say good night. Clara was fine, perfectly fine. Was she? Poirot's moustache twitched. Or was she, perhaps, distressed, preoccupied? The mind of Hercule Poirot, it wonders. Charles pushed off the wall, his voice sharp. This is absurd. You're accusing us all without evidence. Clara probably ran off. Girls her age do foolish things. Why all this fuss? Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Foolish perhaps, but not without reason. And I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in coincidences. No, there is a pattern here, a thread that weaves through the lies and the silences. And today, Mies Amos, I have found a new thread. The room stilled. Elsie, the maid, who had been standing quietly by the door, gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Poirot's gaze flicked to her, and for a moment their eyes met. The girl's face paled, and she looked away, her fingers trembling. Mademoiselle? Elsie Poirot said gently, you have been most helpful in keeping the manor in order, but I suspect you know more than you have shared. Will you not speak now, or must I coax the truth from you? Elsie's eyes darted to the floor, then to Lady Evelyn, who was staring at her with an intensity that could have shattered glass. I don't know anything, sir, Elsie stammered. I swear it. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and soothing, like a parent calming a frightened child. Come, come, ma petite. The truth, it is heavy, but to carry it alone is heavier still. You saw something, did you not? Or perhaps you heard something. Elsie's lips quivered. The room seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on the trembling maid. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, It was about Miss Clara. I didn't mean to listen, but I heard her talking, in the library, 2 nights before she disappeared. With whom? Poirot pressed, his tone firm but kind. Elsie hesitated, her gaze flickering to Charles, then away. With Mr. Grayson, sir, the solicitor. A collective gasp rose from the room. Harold Grayson, a thin, bespectacled man in his 40s, stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is preposterous, he sputtered. I spoke to Clara about her inheritance, nothing more. The girl is lying. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Is she, Monsieur Grayson? Or is it you who conceals the truth? Let us hear what Mademoiselle Elsie has to say. Elsie swallowed hard, her voice gaining strength as she continued. They were arguing, sir. Miss Clara was upset. She didn't want to sign something Mr. Grayson was pushing on her. She said she knew about him and someone else, someone she shouldn't have known about. The room erupted in murmurs. Lady Evelyn's handkerchief fell to the floor, and Charles's face darkened. Sir Reginald slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. What is this nonsense? Grayson, explain yourself. Grayson's face was ashen, but he straightened, adjusting his glasses with a trembling hand. This is a misunderstanding. Clara was emotionally young women often are. We discussed her trust fund, and she misinterpreted my advice. As for this supposed someone else, it's a fabrication. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A fabrication, you say? Yet Mademoiselle Elsie's words ring with the clarity of truth. And there is more, is there not, Elsie? You did not simply overhear. You saw something that night, too. Elsie's hands twisted in her apron, and tears welled in her eyes. I didn't want to say, sir. I was afraid. But after Miss Clara and Mr. Grayson argued, I saw Mr. Grayson leave the library. He looked angry, and he was holding a letter. It had Miss Clara's seal on it. Poirot's moustache quivered with satisfaction. A letter, you say? The same letter, perhaps, that I found torn in the study. The one with words that spoke of love and betrayal. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down like a storm cloud. Grayson's composure cracked, his hands clenching into fists. You have no proof, he said, his voice low and dangerous. This is conjecture, nothing more. Poirot smiled, a small, dangerous smile. Conjecture, Monsieur Grayson. No. No, the little grey cells, they do not deal in conjecture. They deal in facts. And the facts, they tell me that you and Mademoiselle Clara shared more than a professional relationship. An affair, perhaps, one that, when discovered, threatened your position and your ambitions. Lady Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her chest. An affair, with Clara? That's monstrous, is it? Poirot turned to her, his gaze piercing. Or is it merely inconvenient? For you, too, madame, have secrets, do you not? Secrets that Mademoiselle Clara may have uncovered. Lady Evelyn's face drained of colour, and Charles stepped forward, his voice a growl. Enough. You're accusing my mother now. This is a witch hunt. Poirot raised a hand, unruffled. A witch hunt, Monsieur Charles. Nan, it is a hunt for the truth. And the truth, it is like a mirror, reflects all, even that which we wish to hide. He turned back to Elsie, who was trembling but resolute. Mademoiselle Elsie, you have been brave. But there is one more thing you must tell us. After you saw Monsieur Grayson with the letter, what did you do? Elsie's voice was barely audible. I followed him, sir. He went to the east wing, to the old gallery. He met someone there. I couldn't see who, but they were whispering. It sounded like they were planning something. Planning? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Planning what, ma petite? Elsie shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know, sir. I swear I don't. I was scared, so I ran back to the servants' quarters. But I think it was about Miss Clara. I think they wanted her gone. The room exploded into chaos. Sir Reginald roared, demanding answers. Lady Evelyn burst into tears, and Charles lunged toward Grayson, only to be restrained by Mr. Wilkins. Beatrice screamed, clutching her shawl, and the other servants shrank. Back, wide-eyed, Poirot stood motionless, a calm island in the storm. He raised his hands, and slowly the room quieted. Mes amis, he said, his voice cutting through the din. We have heard a whisper of betrayal, and it is a whisper that echoes through this house. But do not fear the truth, it is near. Tomorrow I shall visit the east wing, the old gallery, and we shall see what secrets it holds. He turned to Grayson, his gaze unrelenting. And you, Monsieur Grayson, I advise you to prepare. The little grey cells, they are never wrong. As the room dissolved into hushed conversations and sidelong glances, Poirot slipped out, his mind already racing. Elsie's revelation had cracked the case open like an egg, but the heart of the mystery remained elusive. An affair, a letter, a secret meeting in the gallery. And Clara, poor Clara, caught in a web of greed and deception. That evening, Poirot sat in his guest room, a single candle casting flickering shadows on the walls. He sipped at tisane, the steam curling round his moustache, and reviewed his notes. The locket, inscribed with the initials CM and JV, suggested a lover, perhaps the mysterious someone else Elsie had mentioned. The torn letter, pieced together with painstaking care, spoke of a rendezvous and a promise to flee. But flee from what? Or whom? Grayson's role was clear. He was entangled with Clara, romantically or otherwise, and his anger at her refusal to sign documents hinted at financial motives. But Elsie's story of the gallery meeting suggested a conspiracy, one that reached beyond a single man's ambition. Who had Grayson met? Sir Reginald, with his iron grip on the family fortune. Lady Evelyn, whose nervous demeanour hid a calculating mind, or Charles, whose temper and secrecy made him a wild card. Poirot's thoughts drifted to the manor itself, its labyrinthine corridors and hidden corners. The east wing, long neglected, was a relic of the Montagues' past, its gallery lined with portraits of stern ancestors. If Grayson had met someone there, it was a place chosen for secrecy, place where whispers could not be overheard. He set down his tisane and rose, slipping on his coat. The hour was late, but sleep was a luxury Poirot could not afford. The gallery called to him, its shadows promising answers. The manor was silent as he crept through its halls, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The east wing was colder than the rest of the house, its air heavy with the scent of dust and time. The gallery stretched before him, a long, narrow room lit only by moonlight streaming through cracked windows. Portraits loomed on the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow him as he moved. Poirot's gaze swept the room, searching for anything out of place. The floor was scuffed in places, as if furniture had been moved, and a faint mark on the wall caught his ajar smudge of wax, as if a candle had been held too close. He knelt, his fingers brushing the floor, and found a single pearl, small and lustrous, half hidden in a crack. A pearl, he murmured, holding it to the light. From a necklace, perhaps, or an earring. Mademoiselle Clara, did you come here, too? He pocketed the pearl and continued his search, his senses attuned to the slightest anomaly. Near the far end of the gallery, he noticed a panel in the wall that sat slightly askew, its edges misaligned with the rest of the woodwork. He pressed it gently, and with a soft click, it swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Poirot's heart quickened. A secret passage, how delightfully cliché, yet how perfectly suited to a house of secrets. He lit a match, its feeble glow illuminating the stone steps, and descended, his hand steady despite the chill that seeped through his coat. The passage led to a small, windowless room, its walls damp and bare. A single chair sat in the centre, its wood splintered, and on the floor beside it lay a scrap of fabric, a handkerchief, embroidered with the initials C.M. Poirot's breath caught. Clara had been here, or someone had brought her belongings to this hidden place. He examined the room further, his match burning low. Scratches on the floor suggested a struggle, and a faint stained blood, perhaps, marred the stone. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Clara lured to the gallery, perhaps by Grayson or his accomplice. A confrontation, a struggle, and then, what? Her body hidden. Her fate sealed in this forgotten chamber. The match flickered out, plunging him into darkness. Poirot stood still, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The pearl, the handkerchief, the secret room, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture, they formed was still incomplete. He needed more clues, more confessions, more whispers of betrayal. He retraced his steps, emerging into the gallery just as the first hints of dawn touched the windows. The manor was stirring, the servants beginning their morning tasks, but Poirot felt no fatigue. The little grey cells were alive, buzzing with the thrill of the chase. Breakfast was a tense affair. The Montagues and their guests gathered in the dining room under the weight of unspoken accusations. Poirot entered late, his expression serene, and took his seat with a flourish. "Bon matin," he said, spreading a napkin across his lap. "I trust you all slept well." Sir Reginald grunted, his eyes bloodshot. "Hardly. This business with Claret's intolerable. Have you made any progress, Poirot, or are we still chasing shadows?" Poirot buttered a croissant with deliberate care. "Shadows, Sir Reginald. Nan, the shadows, they begin to take shape. Last night I made a most interesting discovery in the East Wing." The room stilled, forks pausing mid-air. Lady Evelyn's teacup clattered against its saucer. "The East Wing," she said, her voice tight. "What were you doing there?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Investigating. Madame and I found a pearl, a single, perfect pearl, lost in the gallery. Tell me, does anyone here recognize it?" He produced the pearl, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. The room seemed to contract, every gaze fixed on the tiny, gleaming orb. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat, where a string of pearls hung. That could be anyone's," she said quickly. "Pearls are common, are they?" Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "And what of a handkerchief, embroidered with the initials C.M., found in a place where no one should have been?" Charles slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "This is madness. You're implying Clara was, what, kidnapped, murdered, based on a pearl and a handkerchief?" Poirot leaned back, unfazed. "I imply nothing, Monsieur Charles. I observe, and what I observe is a house full of secrets, where no one speaks the whole truth. But fear not the truth. It cannot hide forever." The meal continued in strained silence, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere. The pearl and the handkerchief were damning, but they were not enough. He needed to know who Grayson had met in the gallery, and why. And he needed to know what Clara had discovered, what secret had made her a threat. After breakfast, Poirot sought out Elsie, finding her in the scullery, scrubbing pots with furious energy. "Mademoiselle Elsie," he said softly, closing the door behind him, "we must speak again." Elsie froze, her hands dripping with suds. "I've told you." "Everything, sir, I swear it." Poirot shook his head. "Not everything, ma petite. You are afraid, and I understand. But the truth, it is the only way to protect yourself, and to honor Mademoiselle Clara. Tell me, who do you think Grayson met in the gallery?" Elsie's eyes filled with tears. I don't know for sure, sir, but I heard a woman's voice. It was low, like she didn't want to be heard. I thought it might be Lady Evelyn." Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Lady Evelyn, with her nervous hands and guarded eyes. Could she be the key? "Merci, Elsie," he said, patting her shoulder. "You have done well. Now, say nothing of this to anyone." He left the scullery, his mind alight with new possibilities. Lady Evelyn and Grayson plotting in the shadows. An affair, perhaps, or a scheme to control Clara's fortune. But where did Clara fit, and what had happened in that hidden room? Day passed in a blur of interviews and observations. Poirot questioned Lady Evelyn, who denied any involvement with Grayson, her voice shrill with indignation. He spoke to Charles, whose temper flared at the mention of his mother, and to Beatrice, who seemed more frightened than guilty. Grayson himself was evasive, his answers polished but hollow. By evening, Poirot was no closer to the truth, but the pieces were falling into place. He returned to his room, spreading his notes across the desk. The locket, the letter, the pearl, the handkerchief, the secret room. And now, Elsie's whisper of a woman's voice, Lady Evelyn's voice. He closed his eyes, letting the little grey cells work their magic. The answer was there, hidden in the web of lies and betrayals. Clara had known something dangerous. She had confronted Grayson, perhaps, or Lady Evelyn, or both, and they had silenced her in the gallery, in the hidden room. But how? And why? Poirot opened his eyes, a slow smile spreading across his face. Mon Dieu, he murmured. It is so simple, yet so clever. The little grey cells, they have done it again. He rose, his fatigue forgotten, and began to plan. Tomorrow he would stage a confrontation, a gathering of the suspects, as was his custom. He would lay out the clues, the lies, the whispers of betrayal, and he would watch their faces, their reactions, as the truth emerged. For Clara Montague deserved justice, and Hercule Poirot would see that she had it. Chapter 7. The Locked Room Riddler. Air in the Montague manor seemed to thicken as Hercule Poirot stood before the heavy oak door of Clara Montague's bedroom. The brass keyhole gleamed faintly in the lamplight, a silent sentinel guarding the secrets within. The room had been locked since Clara's disappearance 3 weeks prior, and no one, not the family, not the staff, had dared to disturb it, or so they claimed. Poirot's moustache twitched as he surveyed the doorframe, his sharp eyes scanning for the smallest irregularity. The mystery of Clara's vanishing had deepened with every clue, and now this locked room presented a puzzle that demanded the full attention of his little grey cells. Inspector Harold Grayson, a stout man with a perpetually furrowed brow, stood beside Poirot, clutching a ring of keys provided by the manor's housekeeper, Mrs. Hargreaves. The door's been locked tight since Miss Clara went missing, Grayson said, his voice low, as if the walls themselves might overhear. The family insisted we leave it untouched, out of respect. But if you think there's something to find, Monsieur Poirot, I trust your judgment. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Respect is a fine sentiment, Inspector, but it does not uncover the truth. A locked room is not merely a barrier, it is a statement. It tells us someone wished to control what is seen and what is hidden. We shall see what this room has to say. Grayson handed over the key, and Poirot inserted it into the lock with a deliberate, almost ceremonial motion. The mechanism clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing a chamber frozen in time. The room was spacious, with tall windows draped in heavy velvet curtains that blocked out the weak October sunlight. A four-poster bed dominated the center, its silk coverlet undisturbed. A vanity table stood against one wall, cluttered with perfume bottles, a silver hairbrush, and a small jewelry box. The air carried a faint scent of lavender, tinged with the mustiness of disuse. Poirot stepped inside, his polished shoes silent on the thick Persian rug. Grayson followed, while Arthur Hastings, Poirot's loyal friend and confidant, lingered in the doorway, his face a mixture of curiosity and unease. "Good Lord, Poirot," Hastings said, peering into the room. "It's as if she might walk. In any moment, everything's so untouched, mon ami. Poirot's voice was soft, but there was a glint in his eye. That is precisely what we must question. A room that appears untouched may have been carefully arranged to appear so. Let us proceed with care. Poirot began his examination, moving with the precision of a watchmaker. He circled the room, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his gaze darting from the floorboards to the ceiling. He paused at the vanity, inspecting the items with a jeweler's scrutiny. The jewelry box was open, revealing a tangle of necklaces and earrings, but one compartment was conspicuously empty. Interesting, Poirot murmured, running a finger along the velvet lining. A space for something precious, perhaps a locket, yet it is gone. He moved to the bed, bending to examine the coverlet. His fingers traced the edge of the fabric, and he frowned. The bed is made, yes, but the folds are not quite perfect. Someone has smoothed this in haste. He lifted the corner of the coverlet and peered beneath, his eyes narrowing. And here, a single thread blue, silk. It does not match the bedding. Grayson scribbled in his notebook, his pencil scratching loudly in the quiet room. Could be nothing, Monsieur Poirot. A servant's oversight, maybe. Poirot straightened, his expression one of polite disbelief. An oversight, Inspector, in a manner where every surface gleams with polish. Nan, this thread is a whisper of truth. We shall listen to it. He turned his attention to the windows. The curtains were drawn, but Poirot parted them, letting a shaft of light spill across. The floor. The window was latched from the inside, the mechanism stiff but intact. He tested the frame, pushing gently, then more firmly. It did not budge. Sealed tight, he said, almost to himself. No one entered or left through here. Hastings, still in the doorway, cleared his throat. Poirot, if the door was locked and the window latched, how could anyone have gotten in or out? Clara didn't just vanish into thin air. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. A locked room, mon ami, is a challenge to the imagination. But it is not impenetrable. There are always means, subtle means, subtle means. We must find them. He returned to the door, examining the lock and keyhole with a magnifying glass he produced from his waistcoat pocket. The brass was polished, but there were faint scratches around the keyhole, barely visible to the naked eye. These marks, Poirot said, are recent. Someone has tampered with this lock, perhaps with a tool not meant for it. Grayson leaned closer, squinting. You think someone picked the lock? Or attempted to, Poirot replied. But the lock is sturdy, and the attempt was clumsy. This suggests urgency, or perhaps inexperience. Poirot stepped back, surveying the room as a whole. His gaze settled on a small writing desk in the corner, its surface bare except for a single ink blotter and a pen. He approached it, lifting the blotter and turning it over. Faint impressions of handwriting were visible, the ghost of words pressed into the paper. Clara wrote something here, he said. Hastings, fetch me a pencil and a sheet of paper. Hastings hurried to comply, returning with the requested items. Poirot lightly shaded the blotter with the pencil, revealing fragmented words: must, leave, danger. He studied the impressions, his brow furrowed. A message, perhaps, written in haste. Clara knew she was in peril. Grayson's face darkened. If she was in danger, why didn't she tell someone? Her uncle, her cousin, someone in the family. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Because, Inspector, she did not trust her family. Or perhaps she trusted the wrong person. The investigation continued for hours, with Poirot moving methodically through the room. He examined the floorboards, tapping them for hollow spaces, and inspected the fireplace, peering up the chimney. He found no secret passages, no hidden compartments, but his expression remained one of quiet determination. "The room is a puzzle," he said at last, "but every puzzle has a solution. We must consider not only how Clara left this room, but why it was locked." Hastings, who had been watching Poirot's meticulous process with growing impatience, spoke up. "Look here, Poirot. Could it be possible she locked herself in? Maybe she was hiding from someone, and then, I don't know, something happened." Poirot nodded slowly. "A plausible theory, mon ami. But if she locked herself in, how did she vanish? The key was found in the housekeeper's possession, not in the room. And the window, as we have seen, is secure." Grayson rubbed his chin. "There's talk among the staff of a ghost in the manor. Some say Clara's spirit haunts this room. Could explain the locked door, maybe." Poirot's moustache quivered with amusement. "A ghost, Inspector? Nan, Hercule Poirot does not chase phantoms. The explanation is human, and it is clever. We must think as the culprit thought." As the afternoon waned, Poirot's attention returned to the vanity. He opened the jewelry box again, sifting through its contents. Buried beneath a string of pearls was a small, folded note, so thin it had gone unnoticed in his initial inspection. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a single line in Clara's elegant handwriting: "Meet me at midnight by the oak." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "A rendezvous," he said. Clara planned to meet someone, perhaps her lover, the Belgian refugee we have heard whispers of, but this note was never delivered. Why? Hastings leaned over Poirot's shoulder. Maybe she changed her mind, or someone stopped her from going. Or, Poirot said, his voice low, someone intercepted this note and used it to their advantage. The discovery of the note shifted the investigation's focus. Poirot questioned the staff again, focusing on the manor's groundskeeper, a grizzled man named Thomas Pike. Pike admitted to tending the gardens near the great oak tree on the night Clara disappeared, but claimed he saw nothing unusual. His answers were curt, his eyes shifty, and Poirot noted the man's discomfort with interest. Pike knows more than he says. Poirot confided to Hastings later, as they walked the manor's dimly lit corridors. His hands, they were calloused. Yes, but also stained with ink. A groundskeeper does not write letters in the course of his duties. Hastings frowned. "You think he's involved?" "I think, mon ami, that everyone in this manor is involved, in one way or another. The question is how." That evening, Poirot gathered the family in the drawing room to discuss the locked room. Clara's uncle, Sir Reginald Montague, sat stiffly in an armchair, his face a mask of indignation. "This is preposterous," he said. "Clara's room has been locked for weeks. What could you possibly hope to find?" Poirot smiled benignly. "The truth, Sir Reginald. It is a stubborn thing, always waiting to be found, no matter how carefully it is hidden." Clara's cousin, Evelyn Montague, twisted a handkerchief in her hands. "It's dreadful, Monsieur Poirot, thinking of Clara alone in that room. Do you really believe she was taken from there?" "I believe," Poirot said, "that Clara's room holds the key to her fate. But it is not the room itself that speaks, it is the absence within it. The missing locket, the undelivered note, the tampered lock. These are the threads of a tapestry, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall weave them together." The family exchanged uneasy glances, but Poirot's attention was elsewhere. His mind churned, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The locked room, was not just a mystery, it was a stage, carefully set by someone who knew Clara's habits, her secrets, her vulnerabilities. The Belgian refugee, whose name Poirot had yet to uncover, loomed large in his thoughts. Was he a victim, a conspirator, or something else entirely? As the night deepened, Poirot returned to the locked room alone, a lantern in hand. He stood in the centre, letting the silence envelop him. "Clara," he murmured, "what did you see in this room? What did you fear?" His eyes fell on the fireplace again, and a sudden thought struck him. He knelt, peering into the grate. The ashes were cold, but among them was a scrap of burned paper, its edges charred but a few words still legible. "Trust no one." Poirot's heart quickened. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. "Clara, you tried to warn us." The burned fragment was a turning point. Poirot summoned Grayson and Hastings the next morning, presenting the find. "This paper," he said, "was burned deliberately, but not thoroughly. The culprit underestimated the resilience of truth. Clara wrote this warning, perhaps moments before her fate was sealed." Grayson's face was grim. If she didn't trust anyone, she must have known something was coming. "But how do we prove it, Monsieur Poirot? The room's given us clues, but no answers." Poirot's smile was resolute. "Patience, Inspector. The locked room has spoken, and its voice is clear. We are close, very close to the heart of this mystery." Over the next days, Poirot's investigation intensified. He interrogated the family and staff with renewed vigor, focusing on their movements on the night Clara disappeared. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hargreaves, admitted to hearing a faint cry from Clara's wing of the manor, but dismissed it as a dream. The butler, Mr. Collins, revealed that the great oak tree where Clara's note suggested a meeting was a favorite spot for her late-night walks. Each revelation added a piece to the puzzle, but the locked room remained the enigma at its core. Mind worked tirelessly, exploring every possibility. Had Clara locked herself in, only to be betrayed by someone with a duplicate key? Had the lock been tampered with after her disappearance to create the illusion of a mystery? Or was there another way out of the room, one so clever it had eluded even his scrutiny? One evening, as Poirot sat in his temporary quarters at the manor, he spread his notes across a table, diagrams of the room and timelines of the night Clara vanished. Hastings joined him, peering over his shoulder. "You've got that look, Poirot," he said. "The one that means you're onto something." Poirot chuckled. "You know me too well, mon ami. The locked room is not just a puzzle, it is a lie. Someone has constructed this mystery to mislead us, to make us believe Clara vanished by impossible means. But there is no such thing as impossible, only the unseen." He tapped a sketch of the room, his finger resting on the fireplace. "This," he said, "is the key. The burned paper, the faint draft I felt when I examined the chimney, it suggests a possibility. Tomorrow we shall test it." The next morning, Poirot, Hastings, and Grayson returned to Clara's room, armed with tools borrowed from the groundskeeper. Poirot directed Grayson to the fireplace, instructing him to probe the interior. After several minutes, Grayson's crowbar struck something solider, false panel at the back of the chimney. With effort, they pried it loose, revealing a narrow crawl space barely wide enough for a person. "Good heavens," Hastings exclaimed. "A secret passage." "Not a passage," mon ami Poirot corrected. "A deception. This space is too small for escape, but it is perfect for hiding something or someone. Clara's attacker could have concealed themselves here, waiting for the moment to strike." Grayson's face was ashen. You mean someone was in the room with her? But the door was locked, the window latched, and yet, Poirot said, the truth does not bend to our assumptions. The attacker entered before the room was locked, perhaps with Clara's knowledge, perhaps without. They struck, then used this space to conceal their presence until the room was searched and deemed empty. The discovery sent shockwaves through the manor. The family was summoned, and Poirot revealed the hidden crawlspace, watching their reactions closely. So Reginald's face flushed with anger, Evelyn burst into tears, and the family advisor, Mr. Langley, remained unnervingly calm. Poirot's suspicions deepened, but he kept his thoughts to himself. The crawlspace yielded one final clue, a single cufflink engraved with the initials J.L. Poirot held it up to the light, his expression inscrutable. Monsieur Langley, he said, turning to the advisor, these are your initials, are they not? Langley's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. A coincidence, surely, he said. I've never been in that room. Poirot's smile was cold. We shall see, monsieur. The truth, like this cufflink, has a way of surfacing. As the chapter closed, Poirot stood alone in Clara's room, the cufflink in his hand. The locked room riddle was unraveling, but the final pieces of the puzzle remained just out of reach. Clara's fate, the refugee's role, and the mastermind. Behind it all was still shrouded in shadow, but Hercule Poirot was undeterred. With his little grey cells at work, no secret could remain hidden forever. Chapter 8. Shadows of the war. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Montague Manor like a shroud, curling around the gnarled oaks and seeping into the cracks of the ancient stone walls. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the gravel drive, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes scanning the landscape. The manor, with its towering gables and ivy-choked facade, seemed to loom larger today, as if it sensed the weight of the secrets it held. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint tang of coal smoke from the village beyond. Poirot's mind, however, was elsewhere on a name, a fleeting memory, a ghost from his past that had resurfaced with unsettling clarity. The previous evening's discoveries had left him restless. The torn letter he'd found in Clara Montague's writing desk, its ink faded but its words searing, had mentioned a Belgian friend who had promised her safety. The phrase had struck Poirot like a bell, resonating with memories of his own flight from Belgium during the Great War, of the refugees he had known, of one in particular whose fate had haunted him for years. Could it be? No, he had told himself. It was impossible. And yet, the coincidence gnawed at him, a puzzle piece that refused to fit neatly into the case of the vanished heiress. He adjusted his hat, the brim casting a shadow over his piercing eyes, and turned back toward the manor. The household was awake now, the servants bustling in the kitchens, the family gathered in the drawing room, their voices muted but tense. Poirot had spent the morning questioning them further, probing the cracks in their stories, but his thoughts kept circling back to the Belgian. He needed something concrete, something to tie the threads of this mystery together. As he entered the grand hall, the butler, Mr. Grayson, greeted him with a stiff nod. "Good morning, Monsieur Poirot. The family is expecting you. Shall I escort you to the drawing room?" "Nan, merci," Poirot replied, his voice crisp. "I wish first to revisit Mademoiselle Clara's room. There is something I must confirm." Grayson's brow furrowed, but he inclined his head. "As you wish, sir. The room is as you left it." Poirot ascended the wide staircase, his polished shoes clicking against the oak steps. The manor seemed to watch him, its portraits of stern-faced Montagues glaring down from the walls. Clara's room was at the end of the east wing, a quiet space untouched by the chaos of the household. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. The room was a study in elegance, a four-poster bed draped in cream silk, a mahogany vanity adorned with silver brushes, a window overlooking the misty gardens, but it was the desk that drew Poirot's attention. He crossed the room and opened the drawer where he had found the letter, his fingers brushing against the splintered wood where the lock had been forced. The letter was still there, its edges curling with age. He unfolded it carefully, rereading the words that had set his mind ablaze. "My dearest Clara, trust in our Belgian friend. He has promised to guide you to safety, away from this house of shadows. Meet him at the old oak by the river at midnight. Tell no one." The signature was illegible, smudged by time or perhaps by design. Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. The Belgian friend was no mere acquaintance, this much was clear. Clara had been planning to flee, to escape the Montague family and their suffocating grip. But who was this ally, and why had they failed her? He turned his attention to the room itself, his eyes sweeping over every detail. The locked room mystery still puzzled him. The door had been bolted from the inside, the windows latched, and yet Clara was gone. He had examined the walls for hidden panels, the floor for trapdoors, but found nothing. And yet his instincts told him the answer was here. Staring him in the face, he moved to the fireplace, its hearth cold and unused. Kneeling, he ran his fingers along the stone, searching for irregularities. His gloved hand paused at a faint seam barely visible in the dim light. He pressed, and with a soft click, a small panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a bundle of papers, tied with a faded ribbon. Poirot's heart quickened as he untied the knot and spread. The documents on the floor, they were letters, dozens of them, written in a hurried, angular script. Most were addressed to Clara, but a few bore no name, as if meant for someone else. Poirot scanned the first, his breath catching as he read, "My heart, the war has taken much, but it cannot take you from me. I will find a way to bring you to Brussels, to a life free of fear. Wait for my signal." The signature was a single initial. J. Poirot's mind raced. Brussels, a Belgian, the war. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one he dreaded to see. He knew a manor boy, really, back then named Julian, a refugee who had fled Belgium with Poirot's help during the war. Julian had been brave, reckless, and fiercely loyal, but he had vanished after the armistice, leaving Poirot to wonder if he had survived. Could this be the same man? And if so, what had drawn him to Clara Montague? Poirot gathered the letters and tucked them into his coat. He needed to speak to the family again, to press them on any connection to Belgium or the war. But first, he sought out the one person in the manor who might know more than she let on, the housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis. He found her in the servants' quarters, polishing silver in a small, dimly lit room. She looked up as he entered, her hands stilling on the cloth. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice wary. "What brings you here, Madame Ellis?" Poirot began, his tone measured. "You have served the Montagues for many years, Nan. You know their secrets, their habits. I wish to ask you about a visitor, Belgian, perhaps, who came to this house some years ago." Her eyes flickered, a shadow passing over her face. "A Belgian? I don't recall anyone like that, sir." Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching. "Come now, madame. The little grey cells, they do not lie. You know something of a man who corresponded with Mademoiselle Clara, a man who spoke of Brussels and safety. Tell me, who was he?" Mrs. Ellis hesitated, her fingers tightening on the cloth. Then, with a sigh, she set it down. "It was a long time ago, sir. During the war, we took in a young manor refugee," he said, "from Belgium. He was injured, half-starved. The mistress, Clara's mother, insisted we care for him. His name was Julian." Poirot's heart thudded, but he kept his expression neutral. "And this Julian, what became of him?" "He stayed for a few months, helping with odd jobs. He was quiet, kept to himself. But he and Miss Clara, they grew close. Too close, if you ask me. Her uncle, Mr. Reginald, didn't like it. Said it wasn't proper for a girl of her station. One day, Julian was just gone. No one said where or why, and Clara, Poirot pressed. How did she react?" Mrs. Ellis's eyes softened. "She was heartbroken, sir. Locked herself in her room for days. After that, she was never quite the same. Always talking about leaving, about finding a new life somewhere else." Poirot nodded, his mind worry. Julian had been here, had loved Clara, had promised her freedom, but something or someone had stopped them. He thanked Mrs. Ellis and left the room, his steps quickening as he headed for the drawing-room. The Montague family was gathered there, their faces a mix of impatience and unease. Clara's uncle, Reginald Montague, stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders tense. Her cousin, Evelyn, sat on the sofa, her delicate hands folded in her lap, while her brother Thomas paced near the window. The family advisor, Mr. Lawrence, leaned against the mantel, his sharp eyes following Poirot's every move. "Monsieur Poirot," Reginald said, his voice gruff, "have you made any progress, or are we to be interrogated again?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Patience, Monsieur Montague. The truth, it reveals itself in time. But today, I have a question for you all. Who among you knew of a Belgian named Julian, a refugee who stayed in this house during the war?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Evelyn's hands twitched, and Thomas stopped pacing, his eyes darting to his uncle. Reg's face darkened, but it was Mr. Lawrence who spoke first. "A Belgian," he said, his tone smooth. "I'm afraid I don't recall anyone by that name. The war was a chaotic time, Monsieur Poirot. Many came and went." "Indeed," Poirot said, his gaze fixed on Lawrence. "But this man, he was special to Mademoiselle Clara. They planned to leave together, to escape this, how shall we say, oppressive household. Yet he vanished, and soon after, so did she. Curious, Nan." Reginald slammed his fist on the mantel. "This is nonsense. Clara was a foolish girl, chasing dreams of adventure. If she ran off with some foreigner, that's her own doing." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and yet her room was locked from the inside. Her belongings were left behind. "No, monsieur, she did not run. She was taken or worse." Evelyn let out a soft gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Thomas stepped forward, his voice low. "What are you implying, Poirot? That one of us did something to her?" "I imply nothing," Poirot said. "I observe, and what I observe is a family with much to hide. A letter torn and hidden, a locket misplaced, a servant who speaks of scandal, and now a Belgian who connects this case to my own past." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, turning to Reginald, he said, "Monsieur Montague, you disapproved of Julian. Why? Was it merely his station, Or did he know something you wished to keep buried? Reginald's face flushed, but before he could answer, Mr. Lawrence stepped forward. Enough, Poirot. You're fishing, throwing accusations to see what sticks. If you have evidence, present it. Otherwise, leave us be. Poirot smiled, a cold, knowing smile. Evidence, Monsieur Lawrence. Oh, I have. Letters, hidden in a compartment in Clara's room. Letters that speak of love, of escape, of a plan thwarted by betrayal. And I suspect, monsieur, that you know more of this betrayal than you admit. The room erupted in murmurs, but Poirot's focus remained on Lawrence. The advisor's composure faltered for a moment, his eyes flickering with something fear. Perhaps, or calculation. Poirot knew he was close, but the final piece of the puzzle eluded him. He needed to find the link between Julian's disappearance and Clara's, and he needed it soon. As the day wore on, Poirot continued his investigation, retracing his steps through the manor, questioning servants, and studying the letters. Each one deepened the mystery, revealing a Clara who was not just a naive heiress, but a woman desperate to break free. Julian's words painted a picture of a man determined to save her, but also a man hunted by whom Poirot could only guess stopped by evening. He returned to the fireplace in Clara's room, drawn back to the hidden compartment. He had missed something. He was certain. Kneeling again, he examined the stone, his fingers probing deeper. This time, he felt a faint ridge, a second panel within the first. With a gentle push, it opened, revealing a single object, a small silver cigarette case, engraved with the initials JVP OIROTs. Breathcourt, Julian Vanderburg. It had to be him. But why was the case here, hidden away? He opened it, expecting to find cigarettes, but instead found a folded note. The handwriting was Julian's, unmistakable from the letters. If you find this, it means I am gone. Clara, my love, forgive me. They know. They will come for you next. Trust no one not. Even those closest to you. Poirot's heart sank. Julian had known he was in danger, had tried to warn Clara, but who were they? The family, Lawrence, someone else entirely. And how did this connect to the locked room? He spent the next hours piecing together the timeline. Julian had arrived at the manor in 1917, injured and alone. He and Clara had fallen in love, planning to flee to Brussels. But someone likely Reginald or Lawrence had discovered their plan. Julian had vanished, either killed or driven away, and Clara had been left vulnerable. Her disappearance, now believed, was no accident but a carefully orchestrated act to silence her. The locked room, however, remained the key. He returned to it once more, standing in the center, his eyes closed as he visualized the scene. The door bolted, the windows latched. Clara, alone, or so it seemed. Then it struck him, a flash of clarity that made his moustache quiver. The fireplace, not the compartment, but the chimney itself. He called for Grayson, who arrived with a lantern. Together they examined the fireplace, Poirot directing the butler to shine the light up the chimney. There, barely visible, was a faint marker scrape, as if something heavy had been dragged through. Poirot's mind raced. The chimney was wide enough for a person to climb, especially a desperate one. Had Clara tried to escape that way? Or had someone entered, bypassing the locked door? He needed more evidence, but the chimney was a start. He instructed Grayson to fetch a ladder and tools, determined to explore further. As the butler left, Poirot sat at Clara's desk, the letters spread before him. He read them again, searching. for any clue he had missed. One letter, buried in the pile, caught his eye. It was not from Julian, but to him, written in Clara's hand. "Julian, they have taken my locket. They know about us. I fear for you. If we cannot leave together, I will go alone. Meet me at the river, as we planned. If I am not there, know that I loved you." The locket. Poirot's thoughts flashed to the misplaced locket he had found in the garden, its clasp broken. It had seemed insignificant at the time, but now it screamed of importance. Clara had mentioned it in her letter, had feared its loss. What did it contain? A photograph, a message, something worth killing for. He retrieved the locket from his pocket, examining it under the lamplight. The clasp was stubborn, but with a gentle twist, it opened, revealing a tiny folded paper. He unfolded it with care, his eyes widening as he read. "The advisor lies. He knows where the money is. The advisor, Mr. Lawrence." Poirot's pulse quickened. The note was vague, but it pointed to a motive: money, always money. Clara's. Inheritance, perhaps, or something more sinister. Lawrence had been too quick to dismiss Julian, too eager to steer the investigation away from the war. Poirot now suspected he was not just a bystander, but a player in this deadly game. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Grayson returned with the ladder, and together they set it up in the fireplace. Poirot, despite his fastidious nature, climbed carefully, the lantern illuminating the sooty interior. The scrape marks were clearer now, accompanied by faint smudges of blood. Perhaps, or dirt. At the top, where the chimney met the roof, he found a single earring, its pearl gleaming in the light. It matched the description of Clara's favourite pair. He descended, the earring clutched in his hand. This was no coincidence. Clara had climbed the chimney, or been forced through it. The locked room was a lie, a misdirection to make her disappearance seem impossible. But why? To cover a murder? To hide her escape? Poirot's mind churned as he returned to the drawing room. The family still gathered, their faces pale in the firelight. He held up the earring, his voice cutting through the silence. "This Mies Amos was found in the chimney of Mademoiselle Clara's room. She did not vanish. She was taken, or she tried to flee. And someone in this room knows how and why." Reginald blustered, Evelyn wept, and Thomas stared at the floor. But it was Lawrence who met Poirot's gaze, his eyes cold and unyielding. Poirot knew then that the advisor was the key. The letters, the locket, the note, they all pointed to him, but proving it would require every ounce of his cunning. The night stretched on, Poirot pacing the manor's halls, his thoughts a whirlwind. He recalled Julian's face, the boy who had trusted him during the war, who had dreamed of a better life. If Julian had loved Clara, if he had died for her, then Poirot owed him justice. And if Clara's fate was tied to that same darkness, he would uncover it, no matter the cost. By dawn, he had a plan. He would confront Lawrence, but not yet. First, he needed to test his theory about the chimney, to recreate the night of Clara's disappearance. He enlisted Grayson's help, setting up a rope and pulley to simulate a climb. The results were conclusive. A person could indeed pass through, though not without effort. The locked room was no mystery, it was a stage set to deceive. With this knowledge, Poirot prepared for the final act. He gathered the family once more, this time in the library, the air thick with anticipation. He began with the earring, the letters, the note in the locket, laying out the evidence with precision. Then, turning to Lawrence, he said, "Monsieur, you knew of Clara's plan to flee. You knew of Julian, of their love. And you knew, did you not, that her inheritance was not just money, but a secret worth killing for? Lawrence laughed, a hollow sound. You're mad, Poirot. I was her advisor, nothing more. Then explain this, Poirot said, producing the note from the locket. The advisor lies. Clara wrote this, monsieur. She knew you were stealing from her, hiding her fortune in accounts only you controlled. When she planned to leave with Julian, you could not allow it. You silenced him, and then her. The room gasped, but Lawrence remained calm, too calm. Poirot pressed on, detailing the chimney, the blood, the earring. He painted a picture of a desperate struggle, of Clara climbing to escape, only to be caught, or worse, killed and hidden. The family was spellbound, their eyes darting between Poirot and Lawrence. Finally, Lawrence spoke, his voice low. You have no proof, Poirot. No body, no witnesses, just stories and trinkets. Poirot smiled. Not quite, monsieur. The chimneyette holds more than earrings. Tomorrow I will have it searched inch by inch. If there is blood, or bone, or any trace of Clara, it will be found. And you, I think, will not sleep well tonight. Lawrence's facade cracked, his hands trembling. Poirot knew he had struck a nerve. The advisor excused himself, claiming fatigue, but Poirot watched him go, certain the man would try to destroy evidence. He alerted Grayson to keep watch, then retired to his room, the letters and locket beside him. As he lay in the darkness, Poirot thought of Julian, of Clara, of the war that had cast such long shadows. This case was personal, more than he cared to admit. If Lawrence was guilty, if he had killed Julian and Clara, then Poirot would see him brought to justice, not just for them, but for the boy he had failed to save all those years ago. The manor slept, but Poirot did not. His little grey cells burned with purpose, piecing together the final threads of a tragedy that had begun in the shadows of the war, and would end, he vowed, in the light of truth. Chapter 9. The Hidden Passage. Hercule Poirot stood in the dimly lit corridor of Montague Manor, his polished shoes silent on the worn Persian rug. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, and the manor seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the secrets it concealed. The investigation into Clara Montague's disappearance had reached a critical juncture. The clues, a misplaced locket, a torn letter, a locked room had led him here, to a seemingly innocuous stretch of panelled wall near Clara's bedroom. His little grey cells hummed with anticipation, for he sensed that the truth lay just beyond the ordinary. The manor was quiet, save for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock in the great hall. It was late afternoon, and the family had retired to their rooms after a tense luncheon where Poirot's probing questions had left them visibly unsettled. He had excused himself, claiming a need to reflect, but in truth, he had a purpose. The inconsistencies in the alibis, the whispers of betrayal from the servant girl, and the locked room riddle all pointed to something hidden, something physical, tangible, within the manor's ancient walls. Poirot's gloved fingers traced the oak panelling, his eyes scanning for irregularities. The wall was adorned with faded portraits of Montague ancestors, their stern gazes following him as he worked. He paused at a section where the wood seemed slightly misaligned, a hairline crack betraying a seam that did not belong. Mon Dieu, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. The manor, she guards her secrets well, but not well enough for Hercule Poirot. He pressed gently, then more firmly, and with a soft click, a panel shifted inward. A rush of cool, musty air greeted him. and a narrow opening revealed itself, a hidden passage, just wide enough for a man to pass through sideways. Poirot's heart quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of discovery. He produced the flashlight from his pocket, a modern contraption he had reluctantly adopted, and its beam pierced the darkness, illuminating a stone-walled tunnel that descended into the manor's depths. Before entering, Poirot glanced over his shoulder. The corridor remained empty, but he could not shake the feeling of being watched. The manor's inhabitants, Clara's domineering uncle, Lord Reginald Montague, her secretive cousin, Evelyn, the nervous housekeeper, Mrs. Harrow, and the enigmatic Belgian refugee, Peter van der Veer, were all pieces in a puzzle that refused to fit. Each had a motive, each a secret, and Poirot knew that this passage might hold the key to unraveling their lies. He stepped into the passage, his slight frame navigating the tight space with care. The walls were damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. The flashlight's beam danced across uneven stones, revealing cobwebs that clung to the corners like ghostly veils. The passage sloped downward, and Poirot moved cautiously, mindful of his footing. His mind raced, piecing together the clues that had brought him here. The locket, found in Clara's room, bore an inscription in French, "Pour toujours, mon amour," for always, my love. It suggested a romantic entanglement, one the servant girl, Mary, had confirmed with her whispered tale of Clara's affair. The torn letter, discovered in the library's fireplace, contained fragments of a plan to flee. Like midnight and safe passage stood out, and the locked room, with its impossible mystery, hinted at an exit no one had considered. A hidden passage would explain how Clara, or her abductor, could have vanished without disturbing the lock. As Poirot descended, the passage widened and the air grew colder. His flashlight caught the glint of something metallic, a rusted hinge. Embedded in the wall, he paused, examining it closely. It was part of a mechanism, perhaps for another door or trap. The manor, he realized, was a labyrinth of secrets, built by generations of Montagues to protect their wealth and their sins. The passage ended abruptly at a wooden door, its surface scarred and blackened with age. Poirot tested the handle, expecting resistance, but it turned easily, the hinges creaking as the door swung inward. Beyond was a small, circular chamber, its walls lined with shelves that held dusty ledgers and crates. A single oil lamp hung from the ceiling, unlit but recently used, judging by the faint smell of kerosene. In the center of the room stood a wooden table, and on it lay a scattering of objects that made Poirot's breath catch. There was a blood-stained scarf, its silk fibers torn and frayed. Beside it, a small dagger, its blade dulled but menacing. A bundle of letters, tied with twine, bore Clara's elegant handwriting, and, most chillingly, a photograph of Clara herself, her radiant smile frozen in time, her eyes seeming to plead for rescue. Poirot's heart sank. This was no mere hiding place. It was a tomb of evidence, a repository of guilt. He approached the table, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. The scarf was monogrammed with the initials C.M., Clara Montague. The blood, though dried, was unmistakable, and Poirot's mind raced through possibilities. Had Clara been attacked here, or had the scarf been planted to mislead? He examined the dagger, noting its ornate handle, which matched the decor of the manor's dining room. A family heirloom, perhaps, turned into a weapon. The letters were his next focus. He untied the twine and scanned the topmost one, written in Clara's hand to an unnamed recipient. The words were frantic, filled with fear. "I cannot stay." "They know. Meet me at the passage, midnight. Bring the papers." The papers, another clue, another thread to follow. Poirot tucked the letters into his coat, knowing they would require careful study. The photograph, however, held his attention. Long as Clara's face, so full of life, contrasted sharply with the grim reality of the chamber. Behind her, in the image, was a familiar backdrop, the manor's rose garden, where Poirot had walked just yesterday. But something was off. The garden in the photograph showed a statue that no longer stood, a detail that placed the image years earlier, perhaps before Clara's disappearance. As Poirot absorbed the scene, a faint sound reached his ears, a shuffle, like footsteps, from the passage he had just traversed. He extinguished his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, his senses alert. The darkness was absolute, and the silence that followed was oppressive. Had someone followed him? The family had been on edge, their alibis crumbling under his scrutiny. Lord Reginald's bluster, Evelyn's evasiveness, Mrs. Harrow's trembling hands, any of them could have reason to silence him. The sound did not repeat, but Poirot remained cautious. He relit his flashlight, keeping the beam low, and returned. To the table, there was one more object he had not examined, a small, leather-bound journal, half hidden beneath the scarf. He opened it, revealing pages filled with Clara's handwriting, a diary of sorts. The entries were dated, spanning the months before her disappearance. One passage caught his eye. "Peter warns me to be careful. He says the family will never let me go, not with what I know. The papers are hidden, but I fear they will find them. If I must flee, it will be through the passage. God help me, Peter." The Belgian refugee, a man Poirot had met only briefly, but whose presence in the manor had stirred memories of his own past in Belgium during the Great War. Peter's quiet demeanor and guarded eyes suggested a man with secrets, and Clara's words confirmed a connection. Was Peter her lover, her ally, or something more sinister? Poirot closed the journal, his mind racing. The passage, the chamber, the evidence all pointed to a conspiracy within the Montague family, with Clara at its center. But the blood-stained scarf and dagger suggested violence, perhaps murder, yet the locked room, with its undisturbed lock, implied a careful plan. Someone had orchestrated Clara's disappearance, and this chamber was the heart of their deception. He decided to explore further. The chamber had no other exits, but the shelves caught his attention. Many were empty, but one crate, tucked into a corner, seemed out of place. It was heavy, its lid nailed shut, and Poirot hesitated. Breaking it open would make noise, alerting anyone nearby, but his curiosity was insatiable. Using the dagger from the table, he pried at the lid, wincing at the creak of wood inside. He found a collection of documents, legal papers, deeds, and a will. The will was Clara's, naming Peter van der Veer as her beneficiary, a shocking revelation given the family's wealth. The deeds referenced properties in Belgium, and Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Belgium, his homeland, where he had fled during the war, the connection to Peter, to Clara, to his own past, was no coincidence. As he read, a shadow moved in the passage. Poirot spun, his flashlight catching a glimpse of a figure before it retreated. "Who is there?" he called, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. No answer came, but the sound of hurried footsteps echoed, fading into the distance. Someone had been watching, someone who knew the passage's secret. Poirot gathered the documents, the journal, and the photograph, securing them in his coat. the scarf and dagger he left behind, not wanting to disturb the scene further. He needed time to analyze, to confront the suspects with this new evidence. But first, he had to escape the passage without being caught. He retraced his steps, the flashlight guiding him back to the paneled corridor. The manor was still silent, but the weight of discovery pressed on him. The hidden passage had revealed more than he expected: a struggle, a conspiracy, a link to his own past. Clara's fate was clearer now, but the identity of her betrayer remained elusive. Emerging into the corridor, Poirot closed the panel, ensuring it blended seamlessly with the wall. He straightened his bow tie, composing himself. The family would gather for dinner soon, and he would observe them closely, their reactions to his subtle hints. Lord Reginald's arrogance, Evelyn's guilt, Mrs. Harrow's fear, Peter's silence, each would betray something under pressure as he walked toward the dining room. The grandfather clock struck 6, its chimes reverberating through the manor. Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of deductions, but one thought stood out: the passage had changed everything. Clara's story was not just a case. It was a tragedy, and he was determined to bring her justice. No matter the cost. The dining room was aglow with candlelight, the long table set with silver and crystal. The family was already seated, their faces a mask of forced civility. Lord Reginald at the head, his jowls quivering as he sipped his wine. Evelyn, pale and withdrawn, her eyes darting to the door. Mrs. Harrow, hovering near the sideboard, her hands clasped tightly, and Peter, seated at the far end, his expression unreadable. Poirot took his place, his demeanor impeccable. "A fine evening, is it not?" he said, his voice light but laced with intent. The family murmured agreement, but their unease was palpable. He let the silence linger, knowing it would unsettle them further. Over the soup course, he began, his words deliberate. "I have been exploring the manor, mes amis. It is a place of many secrets, Nan. Old houses, they have ways of hiding the truth." He paused, watching their reactions. Lord Reginald coughed, Evelyn's spoon clattered, Mrs. Harrow flinched, and Peter's gaze met his, steady and piercing. Poirot continued, his tone conversational. "For example, I have found that some rooms are not as they seem. Passages, perhaps, where one might conceal evidence." The word hung in the air, and the room seemed to grow colder. He did not mention the chamber or its contents, but the implication was clear. Evelyn spoke first, her voice trembling. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot? This is our home. There are no secrets here." Her words were defiant, but her eyes betrayed fear. Lord Reginald slammed his fist on the table. "Enough of this nonsense. You come here, poking into our affairs, accusing us of God knows what. Clara ran off, that's all. She was a foolish girl, always chasing dreams." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Foolish, perhaps, but not without reason. I wonder, Lord Reginald, what dreams she chased, and who sought to stop her." His gaze shifted to Peter, who remained silent, his hands folded calmly. Mrs. Harrow excused herself, muttering about the kitchen, but Poirot noted her hurried exit. She knew something, he was certain. The meal continued, the tension thick, and Poirot let the family stew in their discomfort. He had planted the seed. Now he would watch it grow. After dinner, he retired to his room, locking the door. The documents and journal lay on his desk, and he began to read, his mind piecing together the puzzle. Clara's diary revealed her fear of the family, her love for Peter, and her discovery of a secret that threatened the Montague fortune. The will confirmed her intent to leave everything to Peter, a move that would have enraged her uncle and cousin. The deeds, however, were the most intriguing. They referenced a property in Belgium, near Antwerp, where Poirot had spent time during the war. The name of the estate, Chateau Vanderveer, was familiar, too familiar. Peter's surname, Vanderveer, was no coincidence. Was he a relative of the estate's owners, a survivor of the war, like Poirot himself? The connection deepened the case's personal stakes. As midnight approached, Poirot heard a soft knock at his door. He opened it to find Peter, his face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly, "we must talk. There are things you need to know, about Clara and about me." Poirot nodded, ushering him inside. The Belgian refugee's presence was no longer just a clue, it was a key. As Peter began to speak, Poirot listened, his mind already anticipating the revelations that would bring him closer to the truth. Peter's story was one of war and loss. He had fled Belgium in 1914, his family's estate seized by the Germans. He met Clara in London, where she was volunteering with refugees, and their bond grew into love. But Clara's family, particularly Lord Reginald, disapproved, seeing Peter as a threat to their wealth. When Clara discovered documents proving the Montagues had profited from wartime smuggling, she planned to expose them. Peter helped her hide the evidence, using the manor's passage, but someone betrayed them. Who? Poirot asked, his voice sharp. Peter hesitated. "I don't know," but Clara was terrified. She said the passage was her only way out. The night she disappeared, we were to meet there, but she never came. Poirot's mind raced. The blood-stained scarf, the dagger, the struggle in the chamber. Had Clara been caught before she could escape? And who had followed him into the passage today? The answers were close, but danger was closer. He dismissed Peter, urging him to stay vigilant. Alone again, Poirot sat at his desk, the journal open before him. Clara's final entry, dated the night of her disappearance, was haunting. "Tonight, I run. Peter will protect me, but I fear the shadows. If I fail, let this be my testament. The truth is in the passage." Poirot closed the journal, his resolve hardened. The hidden passage had revealed Clara's fate, but the mastermind behind her disappearance remained at large. Tomorrow, he would confront the family, using the evidence to force the truth into the open. For now, he locked the documents in his suitcase and extinguished the lamp, the darkness of Montague Manor closing around him. The night was far from over, and Hercule Poirot knew that the shadows still held secrets waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 10. The False Confession. The air in the Montague Manor was thick with tension, the kind that settles into the bones like damp cold. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the drawing-room, his small, precise frame a stark contrast to the sprawling opulence around him. The room, with its heavy velvet drapes and polished mahogany, seemed to hold its breath. The family, servants, and a few lingering guests sat or stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a gallery of unease, suspicion, and barely concealed fear. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a telltale sign that his little grey cells were at their peak, weaving together the threads of a case that had grown more tangled with each passing hour. The investigation into Clara Montague's disappearance had reached a critical juncture. The clues, a locket with a cryptic inscription, a torn letter, a secret passage, had painted a picture of a young woman caught in a web of deceit, betrayal, and possibly murder. Yet the manor's inhabitants had closed ranks, their alibis a carefully constructed facade that Poirot had chipped away at with relentless precision. Now, as the clock on the mantel struck 10, its chimes reverberating like a warning, Poirot prepared to push the case toward its breaking point. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "we have reached a moment of truth. The disappearance of Mademoiselle Clara Montague is no longer a simple matter of a wayward heiress. Nan, it is a puzzle of the most intricate design, one that conceals a crime of grave consequence. And yet, the truth, it is close, so close I can almost touch it." His dark eyes swept the room, lingering on each face. There was Sir Reginald Montague, Clara's uncle, his stern features etched with a mix of indignation and fatigue. Beside him, his daughter, Beatrice, Clara's cousin, sat with her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed on the floor. The family solicitor, Mr. Gerald Hawthorne, leaned against a bookcase, his sharp features unreadable. Mrs. Evelyn Langston, Clara's aunt by marriage, fidgeted with her pearls, her lips pursed in disapproval. The servants, Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, Thomas, the footman, and Lily, the young maid who had whispered of Clara's scandalous affairs, stood at the periphery, their expressions a mix of deference and dread. And then there was Monsieur Julien Dubois, the Belgian refugee whose connection to Clara had stirred memories Poirot had long buried. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly. "The facts, they are these. Mademoiselle Clara vanished from this manor 3 weeks ago. Her room, it was locked from the inside, a riddle that suggests impossibility. Yet we have uncovered much since then. A locket, inscribed with words of love. A letter, torn but revealing a plan to flee. A secret passage, leading to a room where signs of struggle were evident. And now, a whisper of betrayal, of motives hidden beneath the surface of this family's respectability." Sir Reginald cleared, his throat, his voice gruff. "This is preposterous, Poirot. You've been poking about for days, upsetting everyone, and what have you found? Nothing but conjecture. Clara was a foolish girl, likely run off with some unsuitable man. You're wasting our time." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, Sir Reginald, but time, it is never wasted when it brings us closer to the truth. And the truth, it is this. Mademoiselle Clara did not run away. She was taken by someone in this very room." A collective gasp rippled through the group. Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Mrs. Langston's pearls slipped from her, fingers clattering to the floor. Even Hawthorne, usually so composed, straightened, his jaw tightening. "Impossible." Mrs. Langston cried, "You accuse one of us. This is outrageous." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "Patience, madame. Let us consider the evidence." The locket, found hidden in Clara's room, bore the inscription "Pour Toujours J," a token of love, perhaps, from Monsieur Dubois, whom we know Clara was close to. The torn letter, pieced together, spoke of a plan to leave this manor, to escape a life she found oppressive, and the secret passage of, what a discovery. It led to a room where a struggle took place, where blood, though faint, was found. Julien. Dubois, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot, I loved Clara. I would never harm her. Yes, we planned to leave together, to start a new life. But I swear I never saw her after that night. She was to meet me at the edge of the estate, but she never came." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Monsieur Dubois. Your sincerity, it is noted. But let us turn to another matter, the alibis. Each of you claims to have been elsewhere when Clara vanished. Yet I have found discrepancies. Sir Reginald, you said you were in your study, but the maid, Lily, saw you near Clara's room that evening. Beatrice, you claimed to be reading in the library, yet the book you named was not on the shelf. And Mrs. Langston, your walk in the garden's curious, Nan, that no one saw you there. The accused shifted uncomfortably, their protests overlapping. Poirot continued, undeterred. And then there is the matter of the locked room. A door bolted from within, a window too high to reach. How, then, did Clara disappear? The answer, it lies in the secret passage, known only to a few. Someone used it to enter her room, to take her, and to stage the scene. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Then, unexpectedly, Beatrice stood, her hands trembling. "Enough," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't bear this any longer. It was me. I killed Clara." The confession hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sir Reginald's face drained of colour. Mrs. Langston gasped, clutching her husband's arm. Even Poirot, for a fleeting moment, seemed taken aback, though his composure quickly returned. "Ma, chère Beatrice," he said softly, "this is a grave admission. Tell me, how did you do this, and why?" Beatrice's eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice was steady. "I was jealous. Clara had everything: beauty, wealth, freedom. She was going to run away with Julian, leaving us behind. I couldn't stand it. That night, I followed her to her room. We argued. I pushed her, and she fell, hitting her head. I panicked. I used the passage to hide her body, then locked the door to make it look like she'd vanished. The room erupted in chaos. Sir Reginald roared, "Beatrice, how could you?" Mrs. Langston sobbed, and Hawthorne stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is nonsense. Beatrice, you're not well. Sit down." But Poirot raised a hand, his gaze fixed on Beatrice. "Mademoiselle, your story, it is compelling. But I must ask, where is the body? And how did you, a young woman of slight build, move Clara through the passage alone? And the blood in the hidden room, how did it come to be there, if she died from a fall?" Beatrice faltered, her hands twisting together. I don't know. I was frantic. I dragged her, I think. The blood, it must have been from her head." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "None, mademoiselle. The blood, it was not from a head wound. It was deliberate, smeared to mislead. And the passage, its entrance is heavy, difficult to move without strength. Your confession, it does not fit the facts." Beatrice's shoulders slumped, and she sank back into her chair, covering her face. Poirot turned to the others, his voice firm. "This confession, it is false. But why? Why would Mademoiselle Beatrice claim such a crime? I propose it is to protect someone she loves, someone she believes is guilty." Sir Reginald's face reddened. "This is absurd. You've driven her to this, Poirot, with your accusations." But Poirot was undeterred. "Let us consider another possibility. The true culprit, they are clever. They know of the passage, of Clara's plans, of her locket. They staged her disappearance to look impossible, to throw suspicion elsewhere. But they did not count on Hercule Poirot." He turned to Hawthorne, who had remained silent, his expression guarded. "Monsieur Hawthorne, you have been most quiet. As the family's solicitor, you know their secrets, their finances. Clara's inheritance, it was substantial, Nan. And if she were to disappear, who would benefit?" Hawthorne's eyes flickered, but he smiled thinly. You're reaching, Poirot. I'm merely an advisor. I have no motive. Perhaps, Poirot said, but I have learned much about this family. Clara's fortune was to be divided among her relatives, but only if she were declared dead. A disappearance, it delays this, unless, of course, someone could ensure the estate passed to another, someone with influence, someone trusted. The room grew still, all eyes on Hawthorne. Poirot continued, his voice rising. I put it to you, Monsieur Hawthorne, that you knew of Clara's plan to flee. You saw an opportunity. You entered her room through the passage, confronted her, and when she resisted, you struck her. You hid her body, staged the locked room, and smeared blood to suggest a struggle. But you underestimated one thing: the locket, which Clara hid, and which revealed her true intentions. Hawthorne laughed. A cold, brittle sound. This is fantasy, Poirot. You have no proof. Poirot's smile was serene. Ah, but I do. The locket, it contained not only an inscription, but a tiny key. That key, it fits a box in Clara's rumour box I found this evening, hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside, a letter written by Clara, naming you, Monsieur Hawthorne, as the one who threatened her if she did not relinquish her inheritance. The colour drained from Hawthorne's face. The room exploded in murmurs, accusations, and cries. Sir Reginald lunged toward Hawthorne, only to be restrained by Thomas. Mrs. Langston fainted, and Lily burst into tears. Amid the chaos, Poirot stood, unmoved, his eyes locked on Hawthorne. You see, Poirot said, the truth, it always reveals itself. Mademoiselle Beatrice, she confessed to protect her father, whom she feared you had manipulated. But it is you, Monsieur Hawthorne, who orchestrated this tragedy. Hawthorne's composure cracked, his voice hoarse. You can't prove it. The body, where is it? Without it, you have nothing. Poirot's expression softened, but his voice was steel. The body, it will be found. The passage, it leads to the old well, does it not? A place you thought no one would look. But Hercule Poirot, he looks everywhere. As the servants moved to restrain Hawthorne, Poirot turned to Julian, who stood trembling, tears in his eyes. Monsieur Dubois, Clara loved you. Her plan was to be with you, to escape this place. Her death, it is a tragedy, but her truth, it lives on. The drawing-room descended into a whirlwind of emotion, grief, anger, relief. Poirot stepped back, his work nearly done, but as he glanced at Julian, a flicker of recognition passed between them, a shared memory of Belgium, of war, of promises made and broken. Poirot's decision to conceal this case, to protect Julian's identity, was a burden he would carry alone. For now, the false confession had led to the true culprit, and justice, though painful, was within reach. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mustache twitching once more, and prepared to face the next chapter of this untold story. The night deepened, and the manor seemed to sigh, as if relieved of a long-held secret. Poirot sat alone in the library, the fire casting shadows on the walls. The case was not yet over. Clara's body had to be found, and Hawthorne's trial would bring more revelations. But for now, Poirot allowed himself a moment of reflection. Confession had been a desperate act, born of loyalty and fear. She had suspected her father, Sir Reginald, of involvement, manipulated by Hawthorne's subtle suggestions. Poirot had seen through it, not because of evidence alone, but because of his understanding of human nature. The heart, it could lie, but it could also reveal. He opened his notebook, where he had jotted down every detail of the case. The locket, the passage, The letter, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the real challenge had been the people. Each had a motive, a secret, a reason to want Clara gone. Yet only one had acted. Hawthorne's motive was greed, pure and simple. As the solicitor, he had access to the family's accounts, their trusts, their weaknesses. Clara's independence threatened his control, her fortune his ultimate prize. He had planned her murder with care, using the passage to avoid detection, staging the locked room to baffle investigators. But he had not counted on Poirot's tenacity, nor on Clara's foresight in hiding the letter. The letter, found in the locked box, was a masterpiece of clarity. Clara had written it the night she disappeared, suspecting Hawthorne's threats were escalating. She detailed his attempts to coerce her into signing over her inheritance, his hints at violence if she refused. She had hidden the letter, hoping it would protect her, or at least expose him if the worst came to pass. Poirot closed the notebook, his mind drifting to Julian. The young Belgian had been a ghost from Poirot's past, a reminder of the war that had shaped them both. Julian's love for Clara had been genuine, their plan to flee a desperate bid for freedom. Poirot had promised to protect Julian's identity, to keep his past buried. It was why this case would remain untold, locked away in Poirot's memory. He rose, adjusting his coat, and stepped into the hall. The manor was quiet now, the family in their rooms, grappling with the truth. Poirot would return to London tomorrow, but not before ensuring Clara's body was found. The well, hidden in the estate's overgrown gardens, was the final piece of the puzzle. He had already instructed Thomas to search it at dawn. As he climbed the stairs to his room, Poirot paused, his hand on the banister. The case had tested him, not just as a detective, but as a man. Justice had been served, but at a cost. Clara's laughter, her dreams, her life, they were gone. And yet, in exposing her killer, Poirot had given her a voice, a legacy. He entered his room, closing the door softly. The night was still, the manor at rest. But for Hercule Poirot, sleep would come slowly, his mind alive with the echoes of a case that would never truly leave him. The dawn broke grey and cold, the manor shrouded in mist. Poirot stood by the old well, watching as Thomas and two groundskeepers worked to clear the debris. The air was heavy with anticipation. The family gathered at a distance, their faces pale. After an hour, Thomas called out, his voice strained. "Monsieur Poirot, we've found something." Poirot approached, his heart heavy. There, in the depths of the well, was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. The groundskeepers lifted it carefully, laying it on the grass. Poirot knelt his gloved hands, steady as he unwrapped the cloth. It was Clara. Her face, though pale and marred by time, was unmistakable. The locket, still around her neck, gleamed faintly in the morning light. Julian, standing nearby, turned away, his shoulders shaking. Poirot stood, his voice quiet but firm. She is at peace now. Her truth has been told. The family wept, their grief raw and unfiltered. Sir Reginald fell to his knees, his pride shattered. Beatrice clung to her mother, her false confession a wound that would take time to heal. Mrs. Langston, for once, was silent, her pearls forgotten. Poirot stepped back, allowing the family their moment. He had done his work, but the cost was evident in their faces, in the silence that followed. Hawthorne, now in custody, would face trial, his crimes laid bare. But for Poirot, the case was more than a victory. It was a reminder of the fragility of truth, the weight of secrets. As he walked back to the manor, Julian fell into step beside him. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice low, "thank you. For Clara, for me. I know what you've risked." Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. "Some truths, Monsieur Dubois, are worth protecting. Go now, live the life she wanted for you." Julian hesitated, then turned away, disappearing into the mist. Poirot watched him go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that this case, like so many others, would remain with him always. Back in London, days later, Poirot sat in his apartment, a cup of tisane in hand. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in the Montague manor. Hastings, ever loyal, had joined him, his face a mix of curiosity and concern. "So, Poirot," Hastings said, leaning forward, "you've been awfully quiet about this case. Care to share?" Poirot smiled faintly, his moustache twitching. "Mon ami, some stories are best left untold. But rest assured, justice was served, and a young woman's truth was honored." Hastings frowned, clearly unsatisfied, but he knew better than to press. Poirot sipped his tisane, his mind drifting back to the manor, to Clara, to Julian. The case was closed, but its echoes would linger. A hidden chapter in the life of Hercule Poirot, and so he turned his gaze to the window, to the world beyond, ready for the next mystery, the next truth to uncover.